Chapter 1. A noon candle in a bright room if you want to see New York trying to behave. Take it at noon in February, wash it with pale sunshine, and set it down in a townhouse dining room with good linen and better silver. The city can still cut you with a gust at the curb. It can still snarl with traffic and horns. But once you pass a doorman who looks as if he has been trained to disapprove silently, there is a chance, a slim one, that everyone will remember not to show their teeth. That was the idea. Anyway, I had been against the whole expedition from the start, mostly because I like my noon meal in the office, where Fritz serves it in civilized fashion and Nero Wolfe can complain about the state of the world with the proper privacy. The invitation had arrived 3 days earlier on heavy paper that probably had its own pension plan, and it had been addressed to Wolfe by hand. That meant either a person with taste or a person with a motive. Often it is both. Wolfe had read it once, grunted, and handed it to me as if it were a subpoena. "Paige Nolan," I said, reading, "Townhouse on East 73rd, luncheon, guests small and selected." "She writes that she would be honored. She would be served," Wolfe corrected. "She knows I do not attend luncheons. Then why invite you?" Wolfe's eyes narrowed at me over the top of the page he had resumed. He had been at his desk, in his chair, with his shoulders planted in it, as if the leather had grown there for him. The room smelled of books and cigar smoke, and, faintly, the orchids upstairs, which Fritz tended with a devotion Wolfe applied only to his own comfort. "Because," Wolfe said, "she desires something. If it is worth my time to learn what it is, I will go." "You will go," I echoed, letting the tone speak for me. "At noon, East 73rd in February." Wolfe grunted again, which in his language is a paragraph. "You will accompany me." I knew I was beaten. I always am. The trick is to pretend you are not, because it keeps your spine from turning to jelly, so at 11:30 on the appointed day. I put on my good overcoat and my best expression of reluctant competence, and I got Wolfe down the brownstone steps and into the car. It took Fritz to do it, and Fritz did not so much persuade Wolfe as remove obstacles from his path. Wolfe descended with the air of a monarch, condescending to inspect a new sewer. The wind on West 35th slapped at his face and tugged at my hat, and when I opened the car door, Wolfe paused as if considering whether it would be more dignified to return to his chair and sue the weather. "Your orchids will survive 2 hours without you," I told him. "They are not the issue," Wolfe said, and got in. The ride uptown was a study in restraint. I had plenty to say about luncheons, social traps, and the folly of leaving a warm office to sit in a room full of people who chew quietly and lie loudly. But I had learned long ago that Wolfe is at his most dangerous when he is silent. He was saving himself. When we reached East 73rd, the street looked clean in that particular way only money can manage. The snow from last week had been pushed into grey ridges at the curb, like exhausted animals. But the sidewalk itself had been scraped and salted until it was safe for expensive shoes. The townhouse was narrow and tall, with brownstone steps and a brass plate that caught the sun and flashed like a signal. A butler admitted us. He had the sort of face that seems designed to be remembered by no one, which is a talent in that line of work. He took our coats, announced us, and led us through a hall that displayed tasteful art, tasteful flowers, and tasteful restraint. It all said, "We have nothing to prove," which is the loudest statement of all. The dining room was at the back, and it was full of daylight. Tall windows faced a small garden that was winter, bare, but the sun poured in as if it had been invited too. The table was set for 8. White cloth, crystal, silver, and a centerpiece that was not flowers, which was a mercy. Instead, there was a single candle. It stood in the center of the table, tall and pale, burning with a steady flame that did not flicker, despite the fact that no other candles were lit. The room was bright enough to read a newspaper without squinting. The candle did not add atmosphere. It added a question. Paige Nolan came forward to greet Wolfe. She was in her late 30s, with dark hair drawn back neatly, and a face that had been arranged carefully like a room. She was handsome in a controlled way. Her dress was a shade of blue that made the daylight look colder. Her smile arrived a second late, as if it had to catch up with her eyes. "Mr. Wolfe," she said, and held out a hand. "Thank you truly. I know how you value your time." "I value my comfort," Wolfe said. He took her hand briefly, then turned his head slightly to take in the room, and inevitably, the candle. "Good afternoon, Miss Nolan." She tightened her smile, just a fraction. "And Mr. Goodwin, of course." "Always," I said. "We come as a set like salt and pepper." Wolfe's eyes went back to the candle. "It is noon." Paige Nolan's gaze flicked to it and back. "Yes, it is. And you have lit a candle." She gave a small laugh that was meant to be light. It landed with a thud. "Atmosphere." Wolfe's brows rose. "In a bright room." Her smile steadied, but her fingers touched the edge of the tablecloth, as if checking that it was still there. "It is a habit. I like it." Wolfe did not argue. He simply looked at the candle, as if it had spoken to him, in an impolite tone. The guests were gathering. I clocked them the way I always do, with the practical eye of a man who has been shot at. You learn to notice hands, shoes, throats, and what people do with their eyes when they think no one is watching. There was a man I recognized at once, though not personally, Arthur Klein, a lean fellow in his 40s with a sharp chin and a reputation for running Nolan's charitable foundation with ruthless efficiency. He had the look of a man who keeps a ledger in his head and does not forgive errors. Beside him was a woman about Wolfe's age, maybe a little younger, with silver hair and the sort of posture that suggests she has never carried her own groceries. Her name, I learned when Paige introduced her, was Celia Hart. She wrote reviews for a cultural magazine and wore a brooch shaped like a bird, as if she needed a reminder that flight existed. A younger man, neat and smooth, was introduced as Dr. Martin Vale. He was a psychiatrist. I have nothing against psychiatrists except their habit of noticing things about you that you would rather keep private. Vale's smile was too quick, too ready, and his eyes were trained to linger. There was a tall man with a thick neck and a lawyer's suit. Harris Bledsoe, who represented Paige Nolan in some ongoing business matter. He had the expression of a man who has never lost an argument because he has never admitted defeat. And there was Rachel Dunn. She came in quietly, almost as if she had hoped to arrive unseen. She was in her late 20s or early 30s, with brown hair tucked under a hat she removed in the hall. Her face was pale, her mouth set as if she had learned to keep her words behind her teeth. She wore gloves, immaculate and slightly too large. She took her place at the table without looking directly at the candle. Her hands stayed folded in her lap. She did not touch her place setting. Not yet. Paige Nolan made introductions in the brisk tone of a hostess who is doing her duty. When she introduced Rachel Dunn, she said, "Rachel works with the foundation. She is invaluable," and Rachel murmured something that might have been thanks or apology. Wolfe's attention settled on her in a way that was not obvious to anyone, except me, which is to say, in a way that was obvious if you had spent years watching him. We sat. Wolfe took the chair Paige had indicated, which placed him with the candle directly in his line of sight. I took the chair at his right, because I prefer to be near the main act, and because if trouble breaks out, I like to have room to move. The butler and a maid began serving, moving with quiet precision. Soup first, something delicate, probably expensive. Wolfe tasted it and did not comment, which in his world is either approval or a sign that his mind is somewhere else. His mind was on the candle. It burned steady, tall and straight. The wax was smooth and pale, no drips yet. It looked like a prop from a stage set, put there to mean something. As we ate, conversation started with the usual safe topics: the foundation's next gala, the mayor's latest speech, the trouble with museums and donors. New York, always New York, as if no other city existed. Celia Hart remarked that the light in the room was almost too honest. She smiled at her own phrasing as if it were a small triumph. "Honesty is rarely convenient," Wolfe said. Dr. Vale laughed too easily. "That is rather cynical, Mr. Wolfe." "It is accurate," Wolfe replied. Arthur Klein spoke about budgets in the careful tone of a man describing a surgical procedure. Harris Bledsoe spoke about contracts. Paige Nolan spoke about impact and vision. Words that can mean anything and often mean nothing. Rachel Dunn spoke very little. When the maid poured tea, the pot passed near the candle. The flame flared, just briefly. As the air moved, it was a natural thing, a small dance of fire. Rachel Dunn's hands tightened in her lap. Her shoulders stiffened. She did not reach for her teacup. Wolfe noticed. I noticed him noticing. That is one of my main occupations. The candle settled again. Flame steady. Rachel's hands remained folded. Miss Dunn, Paige Nolan said at one point. Her voice sharpened with something that might have been irritation. You are very quiet. Rachel looked up, startled. Her eyes went to the candle for a fraction of a second, then away. I am listening, she said. Listening is admirable, Celia Hart said, but participation is more fun. Rachel's mouth moved, as if she were about to smile. It did not quite happen. I am not very fun. Dr. Vale leaned forward slightly. The way a man does when he wants to appear interested. That is often a matter of habit. Rachel's eyes flicked to him. Some habits are safer than others. There was a brief pause in the conversation. A tiny hitch, like a record skipping. Paige Nolan's smile tightened again. Wolfe picked up his fork and placed it down with deliberate care. His gaze moved from Rachel Dunn's gloves to the candle and back again. Miss Nolan, Wolfe said, his tone conversational, but with an edge that could slice paper. You said, the candle is for atmosphere. Yes, and yet, Wolfe said, several of your guests are leaning away from it. Arthur Klein made a small sound in his throat. Harris Bledsoe's eyes narrowed. Celia Hart lifted her brows, amused. Dr. Vale looked curious. Rachel Dunn did not move. Paige Nolan's fingers tightened on her knife. People are odd, she said. Perhaps they fear fire. It is not the fire they fear, Wolfe said. Paige Nolan's smile came a second late again. No, Wolfe said. They fear what it means. That was Wolfe, all right. He could turn a luncheon into an interrogation without raising his voice. Paige Nolan's gaze went to the candle. The flame stayed steady, indifferent. It means nothing, she said. Wolfe's eyes did not leave her. Then extinguish it. A hostess being told to put out her candle is not common luncheon talk, and you could feel the room adjust around it. The sunlight seemed to pause at the windows. The maid pouring tea hesitated with the pot half tilted. Paige Nolan held Wolfe's gaze. For a moment, I thought she might defy him out of sheer stubborn pride. Then her eyes flicked to Arthur Klein and to Rachel Dunn's folded hands. She reached toward the candle. Her fingers hovered for a fraction of a second over the flame, as if she were reluctant to disturb it. Then she pinched the wick with a small brass snuffer that had been sitting beside the holder. The flame died with a little curl of smoke. The room did not get darker. It was bright as ever, but something eased, as if a wire had been loosened. Rachel Dunn exhaled, quietly. She reached for her teacup. Wolfe watched her fingers close around it. The gloves were pale and clean, and the fingertips were smooth. But the gloves did not fit. The material bunched slightly at the knuckles, and the length of the fingers was too much. Borrowed things make honest people nervous, Wolfe had murmured, so softly only I heard. It was not the kind of remark you find in etiquette manuals. I filed it away. The luncheon continued. Fish, then a small roast, then a dessert that looked like art and tasted like discipline. Wolfe ate with his usual precision, but his attention moved like a slow spotlight across the table, lingering here and there. The talk shifted. Paige Nolan spoke of a new donor who wished to remain anonymous. Arthur Klein mentioned, too casually, that anonymous gifts can be a problem when auditors arrive. Harris Bledsoe said auditors can be managed. Celia Hart said everything can be managed until it cannot. Dr. Vale said people become anxious when they feel watched. Rachel Dunn stared at her plate as if it were a map she did not trust. At one point, while Paige Nolan was speaking to Celia Hart, Rachel Dunn's left hand moved under the table, It was subtle, quick, but I caught it. She tugged at the cuff of her glove, pulling it down a fraction. Then she folded her hands again, as if afraid they might betray her. Wolfe's eyes went to the place where her wrist would be. His face remained blank, but I saw the small tightening at the corner of his mouth. That was his version of a whistle. When the coffee came, Paige Nolan made a polite speech about community and responsibility. Wolfe stared at his cup as if weighing whether the words had any nourishment. After the dessert plates were cleared, Paige Nolan rose. "Mr. Wolfe," she said, "may I speak with you privately for a moment?" Wolfe's brows rose. "It seems you may." She looked at me. "Mr. Goodwin, would you excuse us?" I looked at Wolfe. He did not object. That was as close to permission as I ever get. "Sure," I said. "I can amuse myself. I am very good at it." They went into a small library off the dining room. The door was left partly open, which was either a mistake or a choice. I remained at the table, sipping coffee and listening to the other guests pretend the interruption was ordinary. Arthur Klein's eyes kept going to the library door. Harris Bledsoe leaned back and crossed his legs, a man at ease in other people's houses. Celia Hart examined her fingernails with interest. Dr. Vale watched Rachel Dunn, who watched nothing at all. A minute later, I heard Paige Nolan's voice, low but urgent. "I did not expect you to notice." Wolfe's voice came back, calm and heavy. "Madam, you invited me to observe." "I invited you because I need help," she said. "I cannot go to the police, not yet. It would ruin everything." "Everything," Wolfe repeated, with faint contempt. "Define it." "Everything I have built," Paige said. "The foundation, the donors, the work. Someone is threatening me." Wolfe's voice was steady. "Who? I do not know," Paige said. "Or I know too many. There are messages. There is pressure. There is something I am being forced to do, and if I refuse, they say they will expose me." Wolfe made a small sound, not quite a grunt. "Expose you for what?" There was a pause. Then Paige Nolan spoke again, and her voice had an edge like glass. "For rigging the raffle that got my attention. I have listened to a lot of confessions through half-open doors, and most of them are not served with coffee." Wolfe did not seem surprised. "Then you have committed fraud." "I have," Paige said, and the words sounded like they hurt. "Or at least my name has been used. Pledges, donor pressure, quiet adjustments to the raffle list. I thought it was being handled. I thought Arthur had it under control. Then the messages began, the threats." Wolfe's voice was dry. "If you are guilty, you will be punished." "I am not asking to be spared," Paige said quickly. "I am asking to be saved from something worse. Someone wants more. Someone wants me to sign something today. They want me to approve a transfer." Wolfe was silent a moment. Then, "Why summon me to a luncheon?" Paige's voice dropped even lower. "Because I was told to. They said if I wanted to prove my loyalty, I should invite you. They said you would come. They said you would not leave until you understood." Wolfe's voice, when it came, had cooled. "An interesting instruction." "Yes," Paige said, and there was a tremor now. "And the candle," they insisted. "A candle at noon. They said it would show them that I was doing as I was told." Wolfe's reply was very quiet. "Who insisted?" "I do not know," Paige said. "The messages come without a name. They come through intermediaries. A note left, a call, a package, always the same demand: obey." Wolfe's chair creaked slightly, as if he had shifted. "And you obey?" "I have," Paige said. "Because I have been afraid, but I am tired of being afraid." There was another pause. Then Wolfe said, "Bring me the messages." "I cannot," Paige said. "They take them back. They do not leave evidence. They know what they are doing." Wolfe's voice carried a faint note of irritation. "They know what you allow them to know." Paige spoke quickly, like a woman trying to keep her courage from leaking out. "Please, I am begging you. Tell me what to do." Wolfe's tone hardened. "Madam, you will do nothing. You will continue your day. You will sign nothing. You will speak to no one about this, except me. and you will pay my fee." "I will," Paige said. "Anything." Wolfe's voice softened only a little. "There is something else. The candle was not atmosphere." "No," Paige whispered. "It was a signal." "To whom?" "I do not know," Paige said again, and this time the words sounded thinner. "But someone was watching." That was the kind of line you want to hear while sitting in a bright room with tall windows facing a garden. It turns daylight into a stage light. Wolfe and Paige Nolan came back into the dining room. Paige's face had been reset into hostess mode, but the delay in her smile was now longer. Wolfe looked the same as ever, which is to say, like a man who has just been insulted and will not forget it. He resumed his seat. I leaned in slightly. "Well?" Wolfe's eyes flicked to me, a warning latter. The guests began to rise. Coats were retrieved. Polite farewells were exchanged. Rachel Dunn stood last. She hesitated near the table, as if something held her there. Her gloved hands hovered over the empty space where the candle had been. The brass holder remained. A faint scent of smoke still clung to it. Wolfe watched her. "Miss Dunn," he said. She froze, then turned her head slowly. "Yes." Wolfe's tone was mild. "Your gloves, they are too large." Color rose in her cheeks. Her eyes flashed toward Paige Nolan, then away. I prefer them," she said, and the lie came out. Clumsy Wolfe nodded, as if satisfied. Then he said, softly, "Borrowed things make honest people nervous." Rachel Dunn's breath caught. Her hands clenched. For a moment I thought she might rip the gloves off right there and fling them at him. Instead she swallowed hard and said, "I do not know what you mean." Wolfe did not press her. He rarely presses. He waits, it is much worse. Rachel Dunn left without saying goodbye to anyone else. When we were out on the sidewalk again, the February air slapped us like an impatient hand. The sun was still out, but it had no warmth. The city had resumed being itself. In the car, Wolfe sat heavy and silent for half a block, then spoke. "Drive," he told the driver, and then to me, "We will return to the office." "Fine by me," I said, "but I have to ask the candle. You knew it was a signal." "I knew it was not a frivolity," Wolfe said. "A candle at noon is an assertion. It says, something in this room is not as it appears." "Like the gloves," I said. Wolfe's eyes went to the window. "Like many things." We reached West 35th Street and went back into the familiar warmth of the brownstone. Fritz met us at the door with the look of a man who forgives his employer's absence only because it is temporary. Wolfe went upstairs at once, as if to reassure the orchids that he had not abandoned them to lesser minds. I hung up my coat and was considering the pleasant prospect of a chair and a cigarette when the doorbell rang. It was the kind of ring that is never casual. It is either trouble or a salesman with courage. I opened the door. A man stood there, hat in hand, face pale, eyes wide. He was the butler from Paige Nolan's house. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, as if my name were a lifeline. "I had to come. Something has happened." I did not invite him in right away. That is a habit I keep for my own safety. "What happened?" He swallowed. "Miss Nolan," he said. "Something has happened." The words hung there in the hall, in our quiet brownstone, under the steady light, that Fritz insists on keeping perfect. Outside, New York rumbled on, indifferent inside. I felt the case take its first real breath. "How bad?" I asked. "Because if you work with Nero Wolfe, you learn to be precise even when your stomach drops." The butler's mouth worked. "Something's wrong," he said. "In the library, and there is wax, candle wax involved." Upstairs, I heard a door open. Nero Wolfe's voice came down the stairwell, calm and heavy. "Archie, who is it?" I looked at the butler, then up toward Wolfe's voice. "It's for you," I called, "and it's about your candle." Chapter 2, The Guest Who Wouldn't Gesture If You Work for Nero Wolfe. You learn early that time is elastic. A thing can happen at 1 o'clock and still, when Wolfe is ready to talk about it, be only beginning. So when the butler from Paige Nolan's house came to our door on West 35th Street and said something was wrong in the library, and said it with candle wax in the same breath, I did not go stampeding for the elevator to drag Wolfe downstairs. I did what I always do when the floor drops away. I grabbed the nearest edge and held on. Wolfe's voice had come down the stairs and I had answered him. Then, instead of letting the butler pour the whole disaster into the hall, I got him inside, shut the door, and steered him to the front room. Fritz would have appeared if I had raised my voice, and I did not want Fritz hearing strangers shout murder in his hallway. Wolfe arrived with a dignity that makes you want to salute, even if you are holding a crisis in your hand. He was not yet in his office. He had come down from the orchid rooms, and he carried with him a faint smell of damp earth and growing things, which was almost comic in the circumstances. He looked at the butler. "You were at Miss Nolan's house." "Yes, sir." The man's hands were trembling. "I am Henry Lark, I recall," Wolfe said. "You said Miss Nolan is in trouble." "Yes, sir. In the library. Something went wrong after you left. There's wax involved. Miss Nolan told me not to call the police yet, but I couldn't ignore it." Wolfe's eyes shifted to me. "Archie, you will attend to this." I opened my mouth to object because that is my hobby, but Wolfe raised a hand. "First," he said, "you will tell me about the candle." That was Wolfe. He could stand in his own hall with murder at the doorstep and still insist on the order of his curiosity. I turned to Lark. "Start where it started. At the luncheon, not after, before. Take a breath and give it to us straight." The man swallowed, nodded, and began. Wolfe listened without moving, his hands behind his back, his expression empty in the way that means his mind is busy. Then Wolfe said, "Archie, you were there, tell it in your own words. I prefer accuracy." So I did. I had been planning to tell it anyway, because when you are working with Wolfe, you do not just see things, you inventory them. You catalogue the angle of a glance and the timing of a smile, and at Paige Nolan's table, the smiles had all been delayed, and the glances had all been angled. The conversation had floated, light as whipped cream, over the sort of topics people use to prove they belong in rooms with expensive chairs. Charity, of course. Paige Nolan's foundation was the excuse for the gathering, so everyone had a sentence ready about the importance of giving. Books came next, because Celia Hart could not breathe without a book in the room, and because people like to mention titles as if they are medals. Winter travel was served like a second course. Harris Bledsoe had been in Palm Beach. Arthur Klein had been in Chicago. Dr. Vale had been in Boston for a conference, and Celia Hart had been in Vermont with a friend who owned a house large enough to be called an estate without blushing. Paige Nolan spoke about a planned trip to London in the spring, then stopped herself quickly, as if remembering that her calendar did not belong to her. Rachel Dunn said almost nothing. She sat with her back straight, and her shoulders held as if someone had tied a string to the top of her head. She smiled when she was expected to, but the smile never reached her eyes, and her eyes never stayed still. They kept drifting, not to the people speaking, but to the candle, and especially to the hands moving near it. Every time someone gestured, Rachel's gaze flicked. A fork lifted, a cup raised, a napkin adjusted. If a hand passed within a foot of the flame, Rachel's eyes followed it with the care of a bank clerk watching a customer count bills. At first I thought it was a phobia. People have them. Some people cannot stand cats, some cannot ride elevators, some cannot watch a needle. A candle is a modest thing to fear, and in a bright room it is almost ridiculous. But it was not the flame that held her. It was what the flame might do. The proof came when Paige offered more tea. The maid had come around with the pot, and Paige, playing hostess, had said, "Rachel, more." Rachel's cup was empty. She had not touched it since the candle had been snuffed. She lifted her eyes to Paige and said, "No, thank you," and her voice was steady but tight. Paige blinked. "Are you sure?" "Yes," Rachel said, and her hands stayed folded in her lap. Wolfe had watched that exchange with a stillness that made me itch. He did not like waste, especially of tea, but he did not comment on the refusal. He commented later, to me, in a murmur that barely moved his lips. "It is discipline," he said, "not fear of fire, fear of evidence." I did not ask him then what evidence he meant, because Wolfe hates being interrupted when he is thinking. I simply watched Rachel Dunn more carefully. Her gloves were pale, immaculate, and a shade too large. The fingertips had extra length, enough to bunch. At one point, I saw her tug at the left cuff under the table, pulling it down as if she were covering something on her wrist. That made a neat little picture in my mind. A woman wearing borrowed gloves does not want to leave fingerprints, or she does not want someone else's fingerprints to be found on her. And then there was the candle. The candle had been placed in the exact center of the table, tall and steady. It was not surrounded by flowers or ornaments. It had a clear circle around it, like a stage. That meant you saw it, and you saw anyone who came near it. A candle at noon is not atmosphere. It is an invitation to watch. Paige Nolan had tried to make it a joke. She had said atmosphere and smiled late. Wolfe had looked at her and at the candle, and had asked, with that maddening calm of his, whether she would extinguish it. She had complied, but she had not done it as a woman indulging a guest. She had done it as a woman, obeying an instruction she did not like. After the candle was out, Rachel Dunn had finally reached for her teacup. That was when Wolfe had made his little remark about borrowed things making honest people nervous. Rachel had reacted as if he had slapped her. All that was still simmering in my head when Paige Nolan introduced the luncheon's small complication. It came during the transition from roast to dessert. Paige Nolan lifted her coffee cup, set it down, and said with a little laugh that did not quite sound like laughter, "I suppose I should mention that the raffle has become troublesome." Celia Hart's eyes brightened. "A raffle at a luncheon, that is charming." "It was meant to be harmless," Paige said. "We ask our guests to pledge for certain items, a dinner, a painting, a box at the opera. The pledge cards are not cash, of course, but they list who promised what, names, amounts. It keeps everyone honest." Arthur Klein's mouth tightened. "And it is helpful for record keeping." "Yes," Paige said. Her fingers touched the edge of her plate. "The cards were on the sideboard before lunch. Now they are gone." The room quieted in layers. Harris Bledsoe stopped stirring his coffee. Dr. Vale leaned forward slightly. Celia Hart frowned, as if someone had moved a book on her shelf. Rachel Dunn went very still. Arthur Klein said, "Gone." Paige nodded. "Missing. I have asked Henry and Molly to look. They have not found them." Bledsoe's voice was brisk. Perhaps they were mislaid. A maid cleared the sideboard. "No," Paige said quickly. "No one cleared it. No one left the room. The sideboard is right there." She nodded toward a mahogany piece against the wall. Its surface empty except for a pair of silver bowls. The cards were in a tray. I saw them before we sat. Celia Hart made a small sound. "How many cards?" "7," Paige said. "One for each guest." Dr. Vale smiled. "Then one of the 7 has them." Rachel Dunn's eyes flicked to him, sharp and brief, then down again. She did not speak. Arthur Klein's voice was cool. "These pledge cards list amounts and names. If they are missing, it can create misunderstandings. It can also create opportunities." Paige's smile arrived late again. "Exactly. And misunderstandings are the last thing we need." Wolfe set down his fork with care. His attention turned from his plate to the table, as if the table had become evidence. "Miss Nolan," he said, "you assert that no one left the room." "Yes, Henry and the maid were in and out, of course, but the guests remained." "And the cards were on the sideboard?" "Yes." "Who arranged the table settings?" Wolfe asked. "And the candle?" Paige hesitated. Her eyes went to the candle holder, now empty. "My assistant," she said. "Molly Hale. She arranged everything." Celia Hart lifted her brows. "Hale any relation?" Paige shook her head. "Number just a coincidence. Molly has been with me for 2 years. She is efficient." Wolfe nodded once. "Assistants," he said, "know where people look and where they do not." Arthur Klein's eyes hardened. "Are you suggesting my employer's assistant stole the cards?" Wolfe's gaze met his, unblinking. "I am suggesting nothing. I am requesting information. I will suggest later." Rachel Dunn's hands moved in her lap, a small twist of the borrowed gloves. Paige Nolan's voice was tight. "It is only an inconvenience. It can be remedied. We all know what we pledged. Celia Hart's smile was faint. Do we? I confess I pledged rather impulsively. Harris Bledsoe said, then we can reconstruct it. Names and amounts can be written down again. Arthur Klein's tone was clipped. Not as they were. Not with the same authority. A card signed by a guest is a commitment. A list written later is a memory. Dr. Vale said lightly. Memory is unreliable. Wolfe looked at him. That is why we prefer evidence. The word evidence seemed to make Rachel Dunn flinch. Her eyes went again to the place where the candle had been. I watched her and tried to build a sensible line from candle to gloves to pledge cards. It was not hard. A candle draws attention to hands. Gloves conceal hands. Pledge cards are paper that hands touch. If someone wanted those cards without leaving prints, borrowed gloves would be a fine idea. But why steal pledge cards at a luncheon full of rich people? You could make more money stealing their watches. Unless the cards were not about money. Unless the names on them mattered. Paige Nolan had called them names that cannot be replaced. That was true. You can ask someone again for money, but you cannot erase the fact that they pledged the first time. A missing pledge card can be leverage. Wolfe asked Paige Nolan to show him the sideboard. She stood, a little too quickly, and led him to it. I followed, because I like to be present when Wolfe looks at things. The sideboard held the silver bowls, a small stack of unused napkins, and a tray that was empty. You could see where it had been, a clean rectangle on the polished wood. Wolfe bent slightly, peered, and then straightened. He did not touch anything, he said to Paige. When did you last see the cards? Just before we sat, she said. Molly brought them in, placed them on the tray, and set the candle. And then we sat, Paige said. The first course was served. We talked. No one rose. No one went to the hall. It is a small room, Mr. Wolfe. I would have noticed. Wolfe nodded. Perhaps. Arthur Klein had come to stand behind us. His voice was stiff. This is absurd. If the cards are missing, someone took them. It is a simple matter. Wolfe turned his head slightly. Mr. Klein, simple matters are often complicated by simple minds. Klein's face reddened. I beg your pardon. Wolfe did not apologize. He looked at the empty tray space again, then at Paige Nolan. Your assistant, Miss Hale, has access to the room. Yes, and your butler. And the maid. Yes, and the guests. Yes. Wolfe's eyes moved, slow and steady, across the table. I followed the sweep. Celia Hart sat with her hands open on the cloth, relaxed and visible. Dr. Vale toyed with a spoon, his fingers long and clean. Harris Bledsoe's hands were thick and confident. Arthur Klein's hands were rigid at his sides. Rachel Dunn's hands were not on the table. They were in her lap, folded, hidden and gloved. Wolfe's gaze rested on her for a fraction, longer than on the others. Rachel looked up, met his eyes, and then looked away quickly. Wolfe spoke to Paige Nolan without turning his head. You have made an interesting arrangement, madam. A candle to illuminate hands, and missing paper that hands have touched. Paige swallowed. It was only a raffle. Nothing is only, Wolfe said. He turned back to the table, raised his voice slightly and said, Ladies and gentlemen, the luncheon is over. I propose a brief inquiry. That is when Rachel Dunn, the guest who would not gesture, pushed her chair back, stood too quickly and said, I have to go. Her voice was steady, but her eyes went to the empty candle holder as if it were still burning. Wolfe's tone was mild. You will remain, Miss Dunn. Rachel's hands clenched in her lap. I cannot. Wolfe's eyes were cold. You can, you will. Rachel looked at Paige Nolan. Paige's face had gone tight, as if she were holding something behind her teeth. None of them moved. Rachel Dunn sat back down. She did it slowly, carefully, as if any sudden motion might leave a mark. I watched her and thought about the candle again. I had seen it flare when a teapot passed, a simple flare caused by a current of air, yet Rachel had reacted as if the flame were a spotlight. A flare can brighten a room for a breath, but it can also reveal something on a hand, a smear, a stain, a spot of wax. Wolfe had said fear of evidence. A borrowed glove can hide a stain, but it can also carry one. And when Henry Lark had come to our door later, he had said there was wax on Paige Nolan's hand. A noon candle in a bright room does not warm you, it brands you. Chapter 3, Wax, Gloves, and Timing. When Wolfe says calmly that he proposes a brief inquiry, the first reaction in a well-fed room is always the same. People blink. They look at each other to see who is supposed to laugh. Then, when no one laughs, they begin to feel as if the chairs have been nailed to the floor. Paige Nolan's dining room had been bright enough to make any lie look cheap, but that did not stop anyone from trying. Harris Bledsoe's jaw set with the confidence of a man who has argued judges into exhaustion. Arthur Cleon's eyes hardened because a missing piece of paper is a personal insult to a man who thinks in columns. Dr. Vale looked entertained, as if this were a demonstration arranged for his benefit. Celia Hart leaned back slightly, pleased to have a story to tell later. Rachel Dunn sat as still as a photograph, which is never a healthy sign. The candle was still at the center of the table. The wick had been pinched under Wolfe's demand earlier, and the pale smoke had drifted up in a thin ribbon, but the candle itself remained where it had been placed, tall enough to be noticed and odd enough to be remembered. If you ask me, its silence was louder than its flame had been. Wolfe stood at the head of the table, his hands clasped behind his back, and addressed the room with the tone he uses when he is being forced to deal with other people's foolishness. "First," he said, "no one will touch the candle, the holder, the sideboard, or the tray. Nothing will be moved. This is not drama, it is prudence." Paige Nolan's eyes widened slightly. "Mr. Wolfe, surely you do not think we have been robbed in the middle of lunch?" "I think," Wolfe said, "that something has been removed. That is the definition of robbery." Arthur Klein made a sound that might have been a cough if he had been less offended. "This is nonsense. We can reconstruct the pledges in 5 minutes." Wolfe looked at him without expression. "You can reconstruct a list. You cannot reconstruct evidence." Dr. Vale smiled. "Evidence of what?" Wolfe's tone stayed mild. "That, doctor, is why we are not moving anything." He turned his head slightly to me. "Archie." That single word meant, "You are my hands and feet, and you will earn your salary now." I rose because sitting felt suddenly foolish, and I moved toward the sideboard with the slow care of a man who has learned that a room can hold more than furniture. A bright dining room can hold secrets just as well as a dark alley, and sometimes better, because people relax in daylight and forget that they are being observed. The sideboard stood against the wall, polished wood with a surface too clean to trust. The tray that had held the pledge cards was gone. Paige had said it had been there before lunch. Now there was a bare rectangle where it had sat, a clean outline, like a missing picture frame. I leaned close, not touching, just letting my eyes do the work. The wood caught the daylight and showed every little flaw. There, on the edge of the clean rectangle, was a faint smear. Not much, and not something a casual glance would catch. A thin, dull streak, more like someone had brushed the surface with a finger that was not quite dry. I looked up. The room had gone quiet in that very particular way that means everyone is pretending not to watch you. "See something?" Celia Hart asked, too lightly. "Maybe," I said. "Maybe nothing." Wolfe's voice came from behind me. "Describe it." "There's a smear," I said, "on the wood, right where the tray would have been." Paige Nolan took a step forward, then stopped herself, as if remembering Wolfe's instruction. "Could it be wax?" I stared at her. "If it were wax, you would see it shine. This is dull and thin. It looks like powder or makeup residue. The kind of stuff that comes off a glove or off a face if somebody wipes the wrong way." Rachel Dunn's breath caught. It was small, but I heard it. Arthur Klein said sharply, "That proves nothing." "It proves someone touched the wood," I said. Saying it out loud made it sound too simple, and that always means you are standing in the shadow of something bigger. Wolfe stepped nearer, still careful not to touch. His eyes narrowed at the smear. "Powder," Wolfe murmured, "or chalk, or face paint." He looked at Paige Nolan. "Who uses powder in this house?" Paige's smile arrived late, as if the question had startled it out of hiding. "I do, any woman does." Celia Hart's chin lifted. "And some men," Dr. Vale chuckled. Wolfe ignored him. "And your assistant?" "Molly uses powder," Paige said quickly. "She is young. She fusses." Wolfe nodded, as if he had expected that, "and Miss Dunn is wearing gloves." Rachel's head jerked up. "I always wear gloves." Wolfe's eyes rested on her. "In a dining room at noon." Rachel's voice went tight. "My hands are sensitive." I could have offered a comment about how sensitive hands are usually kept away from hot coffee and rough men, but I decided to save my wit. Wolfe was not interested in my jokes right then. He turned to me. "Archie, the candle." I glanced at the candle at the table's center. It sat in a simple holder, brass or bronze, heavy enough to keep it upright. The wick was blackened from the snuff. The wax was smooth, pale, and the candle itself was lower than I remembered. That made me pause. I had noticed the candle, of course. It had demanded to be noticed. But now that I was looking at it as an object, not a symbol, I could see something else. It had burned down more than a candle lit at noon had any business doing. A candle that has been lit for a few minutes looks fresh, proud, still tall. This one looked used. I moved closer, still without touching it, and measured it with my eyes. I am not a candle expert, but I know the difference between a cigarette that has been puffed twice and one that has been smoked to the filter. This candle was closer to the filter. "It's low," I said. Wolfe's gaze sharpened. "How low?" "Lower than it should be for a candle that was lit just before guests arrived," I said. Then I added, because Wolfe likes the full picture, "lower than it was when we came in, if my memory is any good." Paige Nolan's voice came quick. "Practiced. It was lit just before the guests arrived." The way she said it made my ears perk up. She did not say it like a woman remembering a detail. She said it like a woman reciting a line that had been rehearsed. Wolfe heard it too. He looked at her as if she had just placed the line in his hand. "Just before," Wolfe repeated. "That is your assertion?" "Yes," Paige said. Her fingers gripped the back of her chair. "Molly lit it. She placed it. It was part of the setting." Wolfe's tone stayed calm. "Then it has burned very quickly." Arthur Klein's mouth tightened. "Perhaps it is a different kind of candle." Wolfe's eyes flicked to him. "Perhaps, or perhaps it was lit earlier." Paige's cheeks colored. "Number it was lit just before." That is the sort of question that makes you feel either very sharp or very foolish, depending on the answer. I had observed it, yes, but not because I had meant to. It had been a bright day, and the townhouse's rear windows were visible from the street, at an angle as we came up the steps, because the house was set back just enough, and the garden was bare. And there, through the glass, I had caught a flash of movement, and a steady point of light. It had been the candle flame. I remembered it now as clearly as if someone had underlined it in my mind. I had thought, even then, that it was a strange touch for noon. "I saw it," I said. Paige's head turned toward me too fast. "You did not." "I did," I said. "From the street, as we approached. Through the window, a flame. It caught my eye because it had no business being there in that much daylight." Paige's mouth opened, then closed. Her smile, when it arrived, was late and brittle. "Perhaps you saw a reflection." "I've seen reflections," I said. "They move when you move. This didn't. It was steady." Wolfe's eyes stayed on Paige Nolan. His voice was mild, but there was iron under it. "Then your assertion is false." Paige swallowed. "I may have misspoken." Wolfe nodded once. "You may have lied." Dr. Vale's smile faded a little. Celia Hart's eyes brightened further, because she could smell scandal the way some people smell roses. Arthur Klein's face flushed with anger, but it was not clear whether he was angry at Wolfe or at Paige for being caught. Rachel Dunn did not move, but I saw her left hand tighten in her lap. Wolfe turned his head slightly toward me. "A candle is a clock, Archie, if you know who set it." I nodded slowly. "If you know when it was lit, you know who was present, or who wanted it present." "Exactly," Wolfe said. He looked at Paige Nolan again. "Who had access to this room before the guests arrived?" Paige's voice was careful now, stripped of rehearsal. Henry, Molly, the maid, and me. And anyone else, Wolfe said. Who could enter your house? Paige hesitated. The delivery man, perhaps, the florist. But they did not come into this room. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. How do you know? Paige's fingers whitened on the chair, because Henry would have said so. Henry Lark, the butler, stood near the door, looking as if he wished he had been born without a face. No one entered this room, he said, and it sounded like a plea. Wolfe regarded him. Your certainty is admirable. It may also be irrelevant. Henry's throat worked. He said nothing. Wolfe's gaze shifted to Rachel Dunn. Miss Dunn, your gloves. Rachel's chin lifted. Yes. Wolfe's tone stayed conversational. Remove them. The room froze. Even the daylight seemed to pause. Rachel's eyes widened. Wolfe's brows rose slightly. Number. I will not, Rachel said, and her voice shook on the last word. Wolfe's gaze did not soften. Then you will show me your wrists. Rachel stared at him. Why? Wolfe's voice was patient, which is always a warning, because gloves that are spotless in a room concerned with missing paper suggest either innocence or preparation. Preparation interests me. Rachel's mouth tightened. She did not move. I spoke because sometimes my job is to apply a little pressure before Wolfe applies a lot. Miss Dunn, I said, you've been watching that candle like it was going to testify against you. If you have nothing to hide, showing your wrists is easier than making a scene in a room full of people who will talk about you forever. That last part hit, because people like Rachel Dunn do not fear fire as much as they fear being remembered. Slowly, with the careful movements of someone handling glass, she raised her hands from her lap and placed them on the table. The gloves were pale and immaculate, like they had been bought that morning and never used. They still looked slightly too large. Wolfe leaned forward slightly, not touching her. Just looking. Turn your left hand, Wolfe said. Rachel hesitated, then turned it, palm up. At her wrist, just above the glove cuff, there was a tiny red line, a pressure mark, thin and fresh, as if something had been tight against her skin and had only recently been removed or shifted. It was not a cut, it was not a scratch. It looked like the imprint of elastic, or a band, or even a string. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. And for the first time in the room, Rachel Dunn's discipline cracked. Her gaze darted to Paige Nolan, and then away, like a cornered animal checking for an exit. Wolfe's voice was very calm. You wore something under the glove. Rachel's lips parted. Wolfe did not raise his voice. He did not need to, then explain the mark. Rachel's throat worked. My watch. The strap is tight. Where is it? Wolfe asked. Rachel's eyes flicked down. In my bag. Show it, Wolfe said. Rachel did not move. Arthur Klein snapped. This is outrageous. Mr. Wolfe, you have no right to interrogate our guests. Wolfe turned his head slightly. Mr. Klein, I am not interrogating. I am observing. Klein's fists clenched. You are bullying. Wolfe's tone stayed mild. I am being thorough. Harris Bledsoe leaned forward. Mr. Wolfe, this is not a police matter. Wolfe looked at him. Not yet. Dr. Vale spoke, still trying for lightness. Perhaps the young woman has anxiety. Wolfe's eyes went to him. Perhaps you are a fool, doctor. That shut him up. Rachel's fingers curled on the tablecloth, leaving no marks because the gloves were clean. She swallowed. My watch strap pinches, she said finally. That is all. Wolfe nodded as if considering. A pinched watch strap leaves a mark exactly where it pinches. It does not leave a straight line like a band. Rachel's eyes glistened, not with tears yet, but with the effort of holding them back. What do you want from me? Wolfe's voice softened, only a fraction. Truth. Rachel's mouth twisted. Truth is expensive. Wolfe's gaze flicked toward Paige Nolan. In this room, it appears to be. Paige's face had gone pale. Her hands shook slightly, then steadied. She said, very quietly, Rachel. Rachel's head snapped toward her. Do not. Wolfe's eyes sharpened. He had heard it, and so had I. It was not the tone of two women discussing tea. It was the tone of a warning. Wolfe straightened. Enough, Miss Dunn will keep her gloves on for now. I have learned what I need. Arthur Klein looked as if he would burst. What have you learned? Wolfe's voice was calm and final. That the gloves are not merely borrowed. They are part of a schedule. Celia Hart blinked. A schedule. Yes, Wolfe said. A timetable, a plan, a sequence of actions, a candle that burns as a clock, a guest who will not gesture near it, a missing set of pledge cards, a pressure mark at a wrist. These are not random. They are arranged. Paige Nolan's eyes widened. Arranged by whom? Wolfe looked at her for a long moment. By someone who knows your house and your habits, madam. By someone who anticipated where attention would go, and by someone who understands that people obey when they are given a ritual. Rachel Dunn's breath came shallow. I do not understand. Wolfe's eyes rested on her. You will, he turned to me. Archie, examine the floor near the sideboard. Also the chair legs. A tray removed may leave evidence. A person who reached may leave powder. I crouched and did as ordered. And I found what you would expect to find when a room has been used by careful people. Nothing obvious, nothing generous. The rug was thick, the floor polished. Chair legs were clean. If someone had been clumsy, there would have been a scrape, a thread, a sliver of paper. There was none, but near the base of the sideboard, where the rug met the wood, I did see something, a tiny flake, pale, almost the same color as the candle wax. I did not touch it, I pointed. Wolfe leaned, squinted, and nodded once. Wax falls. It does not climb. The question is where it fell from. Paige Nolan's voice came tight. From the candle. Possibly, Wolfe said. Or from a hand that held wax. Rachel Dunn made a small sound. She shut her eyes for a second, then opened them and stared at the table as if it were about to split. Wolfe looked at Paige Nolan. Where is your assistant, Miss Hale? Paige swallowed. Molly is in the kitchen. I sent her to help. Bring her, Wolfe said. Paige hesitated, then nodded to Henry. Henry left the room like a man escaping judgment. While we waited, Wolfe spoke in that calm tone he uses when he is putting pieces on a board. The candle was lit before the guests arrived. Wolfe said, That is established by my assistant's observation. Paige's mouth tightened. The candle burned to a point inconsistent with your claim. Wolfe went on. That means it was lit earlier than you admitted. Or it was lit and extinguished and relit. Or it is a candle made to deceive. In any case, it was intended to measure time, not atmosphere. Celia Hart said softly. Measure time for what? Wolfe's eyes met hers, for a moment, a window, a point at which a hand could move and be watched. Arthur Klein snapped. You make it sound like theater. Wolfe's tone was dry. It is theater, but theater with a purpose. Dr. Vale said, If this is a plan, why announce it? Wolfe looked at him with faint contempt. Because the plan has already been executed. We are now discussing its remains. Rachel Dunn's voice was small, executed. Wolfe's gaze went to her. The pledge cards are missing. That is a completed act. Paige Nolan's face was rigid. They may be found. Wolfe's tone was flat. Perhaps, or perhaps they are exactly where they were intended to be. Henry returned with a young woman behind him. Molly Hale was in her 20s, with blonde hair pinned neatly, and a face that would have been pretty if it were not currently pinched with fear. She wore a simple dress and an apron, as if she had been caught between serving and escaping. Her eyes darted around the room, landing on the candle, on the sideboard, on Rachel Dunn's gloved hands, and finally on Paige Nolan. Paige's voice was controlled. Molly, Mr. Wolfe has questions. Molly swallowed. Yes, Miss Nolan. Wolfe regarded her. You arranged the table. Yes, sir. You placed the pledge cards on the tray. Yes, and you lit the candle. Molly hesitated. Her eyes flicked to Paige Nolan. Yes, Wolfe's tone remained calm. When? Molly's mouth closed, opened again, just before the guests arrived. Wolfe's eyes did not change. That is a lie. Molly's face went white. I did not mean it. Wolfe's voice was mild. You meant it. You were instructed to say it. Molly's hands twisted in her apron. Miss Nolan. Paige Nolan's voice was sharp. Molly. Wolfe lifted a hand, and the gesture stopped them both, as if he had pressed a button. Miss Hale, Wolfe said, tell me when you lit the candle. Molly's eyes filled. Early, she whispered, before anyone came, before I set the plates. How early? Wolfe asked. Molly swallowed. An hour, maybe more. Paige Nolan's breath caught, and for a second her composure slipped, showing something raw underneath. Arthur Klein's voice was harsh. Why? Molly flinched. Because Miss Nolan told me to. Paige Nolan said, I did not. Molly's eyes snapped to her. You did. You said it had to be lit. You said it was important. You said someone would know if it was not. The room tightened like a fist. Wolfe's gaze stayed on Paige Nolan. So? Someone instructed you. Paige's jaw trembled. Yes. Wolfe nodded once, as if confirming a hypothesis. Then he looked at Molly Hale. And the pledge cards. When did you last see them? Molly wiped at her cheek with the back of her hand, leaving a faint streak of powder on her skin. Before lunch, on the tray. Did you remove them? Wolfe asked. No, Molly said quickly. No, sir. Did anyone else handle the tray? Wolfe asked. Molly's eyes darted to Rachel Dunn, and then away so fast it was almost comic. Wolfe's voice stayed calm. Miss Hale, look at Miss Dunn's gloves. Molly hesitated, then looked. Her eyes went wide, then dropped to Rachel's left wrist where the red line still showed. Molly's mouth opened slightly. She shut it again. Wolfe's tone sharpened just a little. Speak, Molly whispered. She asked me for them. Rachel's head snapped up. Number Molly flinched. You did this morning. You said you spilled something on yours. Rachel's voice rose, tight and desperate. Stop. Wolfe's eyes were cold. The gloves were borrowed. Rachel's face crumpled for a second, then hardened again. So what? Borrowing is not a crime. No, Wolfe agreed, but borrowing for a purpose is an intention. Rachel's hands clenched on the tablecloth. I did not take the cards. Wolfe looked at her. I have not said you did. Rachel stared. Thrown off balance, Wolfe turned back to Paige Nolan. The candle was lit early to serve as a clock. The gloves were required to control what was left behind. The schedule exists. The only remaining question is who wrote it. Paige Nolan's voice was barely audible. And why? Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Because someone wanted those pledge cards, not for money, but for names, for leverage, for a list that cannot be replaced. Arthur Klein's face had gone stiff. This is madness. Wolfe looked at him. Then you will be relieved to learn that madness is rarely this orderly. Rachel Dunn's eyes closed again, and when she opened them, there was a tired look there. The look of someone who has been holding her breath too long. Wolfe's voice softened slightly, not with kindness, but with certainty. Miss Dunn, the gloves are part of a schedule. That schedule includes you. If you do not tell me why, you will discover the reason at a moment that will not please you. Rachel's lips trembled. You do not understand. Wolfe's gaze held hers. I understand clocks. Rachel swallowed. Her eyes darted to Paige Nolan, and in that glance I saw something that made my stomach tighten. It was not fear of Paige. It was fear for her, mixed with anger, Rachel said, very quietly. It was not supposed to go this far. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Farther than missing pledge cards. Rachel's hands clenched. Yes. The daylight in the room did not change, but it felt as if the air had cooled. A candle at noon is a foolish thing, until you learn it was lit to measure a moment. Wolfe had measured it, and now he was looking for the hand that had set it burning. Chapter 4. The borrowed gloves, if there is one thing I have learned from watching Nero Wolfe work, it is that he does not hurry people when they are already moving toward the edge. He lets them walk there on their own, and then he speaks. The result is usually cleaner and far more uncomfortable than shouting. Rachel Dunn sat very straight in her chair, her pale gloves resting on the table as if they had been placed there deliberately for inspection. The red pressure line at her left wrist was still visible, an irritated little mark that looked increasingly lonely now that everyone had seen it. Paige Nolan stood near the sideboard, her composure held together by practice and pride. Molly Hale hovered near the doorway, hands bare, fingers clasped together, as if she were afraid they might wander off on their own. The candle remained at the center of the table, extinguished but present, its smooth wax sides faintly scarred from having been burned down earlier than claimed. No one went near it. Wolfe did not speak at once. He let the silence do a little work for him. I decided to help it along. "Miss Dunn," I said, keeping my tone polite, friendly even, as if we were discussing hats instead of evidence. "Those are fine gloves. Good leather, soft. They look expensive." Rachel's eyes flicked to me. "They are." "Where did you buy them?" I asked. "I might like to recommend the place to a friend." The question was harmless enough on its face, and that was exactly why it worked. Rachel hesitated. It was not long, but it was enough. Her eyes shifted, not to Wolfe, but to Molly Hale, and then away again. "They were a gift," Rachel said. "That is generous," I said. "From whom?" Rachel's mouth tightened. "A friend." Wolfe stirred then, just slightly, like a large animal adjusting its weight. "Miss Dunn," he said, and his voice was gentler than I expected, "I am not interested in politeness. I am interested in accuracy. Whose gloves are they?" "Really?" Rachel closed her eyes for a moment, as if bracing herself against a wind. When she opened them, there was a tired look there, the look of someone who has rehearsed a lie and knows it is no longer useful. "I borrowed them," she said. Paige Nolan inhaled sharply. Molly Hale's head came up, then dropped again. Wolfe nodded once. "From whom?" Rachel did not answer immediately. Her gloved fingers curled slightly on the tablecloth, careful not to crease it. "I needed to look proper," she said finally. "This luncheon was important." "To you," Wolfe said. "Yes," Rachel said, "to me." "And so you borrowed gloves," Wolfe said, still mild. "That is not unusual. What is unusual is your reluctance to name the lender." Rachel swallowed. "It does not matter." "It matters to me," Wolfe said. "And therefore it matters." Rachel's eyes moved again, and this time they landed on Molly Hale and stayed there a fraction too long. "Molly," Paige Nolan said sharply, "what is this?" Molly Hale flinched. Her hands twisted together. "Miss Nolan, I did not." Wolfe lifted a hand, not looking at her yet. "Miss Dunn will speak." Rachel's shoulders sagged a little, as if something had finally been set down. "They are Molly's," she said. "I borrowed them from Molly Hale." The room reacted in small, separate ways. Paige Nolan stiffened, her face draining of color. Arthur Klein made a sound of disbelief. Celia Hart leaned forward, interest sharpening her features. Dr. Vale's eyes brightened, because psychiatrists enjoy a confession almost as much as they enjoy a diagnosis. I felt my brows lift before I could stop them. Molly Hale, the assistant, the one who had arranged the table, placed the pledge cards, and lit the candle. The one who had been gliding around the edges of the room all afternoon with bare hands, never once approaching the center of the table. I looked at Molly now, really looked. She stood close to the wall, as she had all along, near the sideboard, near the door, near places where people do not look unless they have reason. Her hands were bare, clean, and empty. She had not gone anywhere near the candle since the guests arrived. She had not poured tea or adjusted a place setting at the center. She had stayed where shadows collect. Wolfe saw it too. "Interesting," he murmured. "You lent your gloves to a guest." Molly's voice shook. She asked me. Rachel turned on her, sharp and sudden. "You insisted." Paige Nolan's voice cut in, tight with command. Ina, Molly, explain yourself. Molly's eyes filled. I was only trying to help. Wolfe's gaze shifted to her, calm and intent. Help? Whom? Molly hesitated. Her eyes flicked to Paige Nolan, then to Rachel Dunn, then back to Wolfe. Rachel, she said. She was nervous. She said she did not look right. She said she needed to make a good impression. And you, Wolfe said, suggested gloves. Molly nodded. Yes. Why? Wolfe asked. Molly's mouth opened, then closed. She looked very young then, stripped of her efficiency. Because gloves make people look composed, proper. They hide things. Rachel's head snapped toward her. That is not what you said. Wolfe did not raise his voice. What did she say, Miss Dunn? Rachel's voice dropped. She said it would help with first impressions. Paige Nolan stared at Molly. First impressions of whom? Molly's hands clenched. Of everyone. That is evasive, Wolfe said. Assistants do not lend personal items to guests without reason. Gloves are intimate. They carry shape. They carry residue. They carry residue. They carry responsibility. Arthur Klein scoffed. This is absurd. Gloves are gloves. Wolfe turned his head slightly. Mr. Klein, you deal in records. Gloves are records too. Klein flushed but said nothing. Wolfe's attention returned to Molly Hale. You avoided the candle. Molly blinked. I did not. You did, Wolfe said. You have remained close to walls and sideboards. You have not crossed the center of the room since the guests arrived. You have not passed the candle. Molly swallowed. I was busy avoiding attention, Wolfe said. Paige Nolan stepped forward. Molly is always busy. She knows how to stay out of the way. Wolfe looked at her. Then why would such a person lend her gloves to a guest? Paige's mouth tightened. Perhaps she was being kind. Wolfe shook his head slowly. Kindness is rarely this precise. Rachel's hands trembled now just slightly. The gloves remained immaculate, as if they were determined to outlast her composure. I did not take the pledge cards, Rachel said suddenly. I swear it. Wolfe inclined his head. I have not accused you. Rachel's eyes filled. Then why am I here like this? Because, Wolfe said, you are part of an arrangement. Paige Nolan's voice went thin. What arrangement? Wolfe gestured lightly toward the table. A hidden one. A sequence of actions that relies on timing and observation. The candle is the signal that holds it together. Celia Hart frowned. A signal for what? For when to move, Wolfe said. And when not to. I leaned against the back of a chair, watching Molly Hale carefully. Her eyes had gone to the candle now, though she still did not approach it. She looked at it the way Rachel had earlier, not with fear of fire, but with awareness. Miss Hale, Wolfe said, you arranged the luncheon. Yes, you know where people look. Yes, and where they do not. Molly nodded barely. You suggested gloves to Miss Dunn, Wolfe continued. And you placed a candle at the center of the table to draw attention to hands, Paige Nolan said, sharply. You are accusing my assistant of manipulation. Wolfe's voice remained calm. I am describing her competence. Rachel's voice was small. Molly said it would help. Help what? I asked. Rachel looked at me, her eyes tired. Help me not leave marks. The words dropped into the room like a plate hitting tile. Paige Nolan stared at her. Marks. Rachel nodded. On the cards. On anything. Arthur Klein's face went grey. You touched the pledge cards. Rachel shook her head quickly. Number I did not. I never touched them. Wolfe raised a brow. Then why the concern? Rachel's breath came shallow. Because I was afraid I would be asked to. Wolfe's eyes sharpened. By whom? Rachel's gaze went to Paige Nolan, and this time it stayed there. Paige's face hardened. Rachel. Rachel swallowed. You told me to be ready. Paige's voice rose, brittle. I told you to attend a luncheon. Rachel shook her head. You told me to watch, to listen, to be careful. Enough. We will not argue over phrasing. He turned back to Molly Hale. You insisted on the gloves. Molly nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks now. Yes. Why? Wolfe asked again. Molly's voice broke. Because the candle was meant to show when it was safe. Rachel's head snapped toward her. You said it was for atmosphere. Molly shook her head. I said that to Miss Nolan. Paige Nolan's breath caught. Molly. Wolfe's voice was firm. Explain. Molly wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand. The candle was lit early, so it would burn down to a certain point. When it reached that point, it meant something. Such as, Wolfe said. Such as that the guests had settled, Molly said. That everyone was seated, that attention was on the table. And hands, Wolfe said. Molly nodded. Yes. Rachel's shoulders sagged. You told me to keep my hands hidden. Molly whispered, I told you to be careful. Paige Nolan stepped back as if the room had tilted. What were you planning? Molly shook her head desperately. I was not planning. I was following instructions. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. From whom? Molly's lips trembled. From you. The room froze. Paige Nolan's face went white. That is a lie. Molly looked at her, tears streaming. You told me someone would be watching. You told me the candle had to be right. You told me the cards mattered. Paige's voice shook with anger. I told you to arrange a luncheon. Wolfe's voice cut through them, heavy and calm. Madam, you have already admitted you were instructed by someone else. Do not insult me by pretending this is all coincidence. Paige Nolan's shoulders slumped slightly, just enough to show the strain. I did not think it would become this complicated. Complication, Wolfe said, is the natural state of deceit. Rachel looked down at her gloved hands. Molly said, if I wore them, no one would look at her. Wolfe nodded. Because attention would be drawn to you. Rachel swallowed. I did not know about the candle at first. But you learned, Wolfe said. Yes, Rachel said, when I saw it burning so low. Wolfe's eyes sharpened. You recognized the timing. Rachel nodded. I realized it had been lit long before. And that meant, Wolfe said, that something was supposed to happen. Rachel said quietly. Paige Nolan closed her eyes. I only wanted the cards safe. Safe from whom? I asked. Paige opened her eyes and looked at me. From people who would misuse them. Wolfe's gaze was steady. By misusing them yourself. Paige flinched. Wolfe straightened, the bulk of him seeming to settle into certainty. The gloves, the candle, the assistant, and the guest were arranged so that one person could move without being seen, while another absorbed the attention. It is a clever design. Celia Hart said softly. Clever and ugly. Wolfe inclined his head. Often the same. Rachel's voice trembled. I never touched the cards. I believe you, Wolfe said. Rachel looked up sharply. You do? Yes, Wolfe said. Because if you had, you would not still be sitting here. Wolfe looked at the candle, then at the sideboard, then at the three women before him. Now, he said, we find out who completed the arrangement, because a signal is useless without someone to answer it. The candle sat silent at the center of the table, its burned down-length marking time that had already passed, and somewhere between the borrowed gloves and the practiced lies, that time had been used. Chapter 5. A candle as a warning. I have often wondered what it would be like if New York were suddenly required to tell the truth for one day. The city would collapse before noon, not because it is wicked, but because it is arranged. It runs on little fictions the way a watch runs on gears. The same thing is true of a respectable dining room at a charity luncheon. Everyone is dressed, everyone is smiling, everyone is saying the correct words, and underneath it a dozen small lies are doing the heavy lifting. At Paige Nolan's table the lies had begun with something as simple as a candle. Wolfe stood near the center of the room and, without raising his voice, had established rules that no one dared break. Nobody touched the candle, nobody touched the sideboard, nobody pretended the missing pledge cards were a joke. Not anymore. People will accept a mystery so long as it is convenient. Once it becomes inconvenient, they demand a culprit. Rachel Dunn sat with Molly Hale's borrowed gloves on her hands, pale and spotless, and with a pressure mark at her left wrist that had become a kind of underline. Paige Nolan held herself upright by force of habit. Molly hovered where assistants always hover, at the edge of whatever trouble is happening, ready to run if called, and ready to look innocent if not. Wolfe regarded them, all of them, as if they were items on a shelf he was deciding whether to purchase. Then he said, "Madam, demonstrate." Paige Nolan blinked. "Demonstrate what?" "How your assistant lit the candle," Wolfe replied. Paige's lips tightened. "That is absurd, perhaps," Wolfe said. "Do it anyway." Arthur Klein made a sound in his throat. Harris Bledsoe shifted his weight, impatient. Celia Hart's eyes gleamed, as if Wolfe had just promised her a chapter in a book. Dr. Vale looked amused. Rachel Dunn looked as if she would prefer the floor to open. Paige Nolan's composure wavered. She was not accustomed to being given an instruction in her own house. Yet Wolfe had given it, and Wolfe's instructions have a way of making other people's preferences seem unimportant. Paige moved toward the sideboard. "We do not usually light candles with a demonstration," she said, as if etiquette might rescue her. Wolfe's tone was mild. "Then this will be educational." Henry Lark, the butler, appeared near the door, his face arranged in professional concern. The maid lingered in the hall, peering in and then withdrawing. A dining room full of money can become a courtroom very quickly. Paige went to a drawer in the sideboard and pulled out a slim metal lighter. She held it as if it were a scalpel. "Molly lit it," Paige said. "Not I. You will perform the action," Wolfe said. "Not because you did it, but because you claim to understand it." Paige's jaw tightened. She returned to the table, approached the candle, and stopped. Even though it was extinguished, she hesitated as if it might flare on its own. "I had noticed that before, and it still bothered me. A candle is harmless, unless you have been taught to treat it as a signal. If it is a signal, you do not handle it carelessly." Paige clicked the lighter. Nothing happened. She clicked again. A thin spark snapped and died. Celia Hart made a small, sympathetic sound. Harris Bledsoe's mouth curled faintly. Arthur Klein watched Paige's hands as if they were a balance sheet. Paige's fingers tightened. She clicked again. A flame sprang up, small and wavering. She leaned forward to bring it to the wick. Her hand shook, just slightly. The flame danced near the wick and then slipped away. Paige's shoulders stiffened. She tried again, bringing the flame closer. The wick caught for a fraction of a second, then died. Paige swallowed. "The wick is pinched," she said quickly. "Of course it will not take at once." Wolfe's eyes remained steady. "Try again." Paige's cheeks colored. She was now doing something she would never do at a social table. She was failing in public. That is a sharper humiliation than any insult. She clicked the lighter again, leaned in, and held the flame to the wick until it caught. The wick smoked, then began to burn with a thin, reluctant flame. Paige straightened too quickly, as if afraid the candle might accuse her. She snapped the lighter shut and stepped back. "There," she said, and her smile arrived late and strained. "Is that satisfactory?" Wolfe watched the candle for a moment, then looked at Paige's hand. "You are nervous," Wolfe said. Paige's chin lifted. "Naturally. We're discussing missing pledge cards and insinuations." Wolfe nodded slightly, as if granting her that. Then he said, "Miss Hale, extinguish it. Then light another candle, of the same sort as you claim you did." Molly's eyes widened. "Mr. Wolfe, I already told you." "You told me what you were instructed to tell," Wolfe said. "Now you will show me what you are capable of." Molly glanced at Paige Nolan, as if seeking permission. And Paige gave a tiny nod that was more surrender than consent. Molly moved toward the table. The change in the room was immediate. Paige had approached the candle as if it were a trap. Molly approached it as if it were a tool. She did not hesitate. She did not hover. She went straight in, lifted the snuffer, and covered the flame with a neat, practiced motion. The candle died without smoke, as if Molly had done it 100 times. Then Molly reached into the sideboard drawer again and drew out a second candle, still wrapped in paper. The same pale color. She unwrapped it quickly, placed it in the holder beside the first, and adjusted it with a twist that seated it firmly. Her hands were bare, they moved with ease. She took the lighter from Paige, clicked once, and got a steady flame. She brought it to the new wick, and held it there just long enough. The wick caught at once, cleanly, and the flame rose steady, tall, confident. She snapped the lighter shut and withdrew her hand without a tremor. Too practiced. That was the phrase that came to me before Wolfe even spoke it. It is the difference between a man who can cook an egg and a man who has cooked 3,000 eggs. Molly's hands did not behave like a young assistant lighting a candle for atmosphere. They behaved like someone lighting a signal at the correct time. Wolfe's eyes were on her hands. Mine were too. "Molly," Paige Nolan said, with faint irritation, "you have always been good at small tasks." Wolfe ignored Paige. He leaned forward slightly, still not touching anything, and said quietly, "Your fingertips." Molly froze. I had seen it too once Wolfe said it, and then I could not stop seeing it. There was a faint sheen on Molly's fingertips, not powder. Powder dulls the skin. This was a soft shine, as if her fingers had been smoothed with something that would not transfer easily, something designed to keep residue from clinging lotion. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "You have applied lotion recently." Molly's throat worked. I always do. My hands get dry." "In February," Wolfe said, "in a heated house." "Yes, but you have applied it in a way that suggests a purpose beyond comfort." Arthur Klein snapped. "Now we are judging moisturizer." Wolfe turned his head slightly. "We are judging preparation. There is a difference." Rachel Dunn's gloved hands clenched. She stared at the candle flame as if it were a verdict. I felt the pieces shift in my mind, and then settle into a picture that made too much sense. Molly had bare hands, but with lotion. Rachel had gloves, borrowed. The candle drew attention to hands. If someone wanted to remove pledge cards, paper, and not leave prints, they had two options: wear gloves, or make sure the prints would not stick. The lotion could help, but it would also leave its own trace if you touched something and then handled powder. The gloves were not for the thief. They were for the decoy. I spoke, because once I see something, I cannot always wait for Wolfe to say it. "Rachel never had to touch anything," I said. That was the point. Molly lent her the gloves, so if anyone decided Rachel's hands were suspicious, they would find nothing. The gloves are spotless. It makes Rachel look guilty and innocent at the same time. Rachel's head snapped toward me. I did not. "I know," I said. "That is what I am saying." Wolfe's eyes rested on me for a moment, acknowledging without praise, which is as close as he gets. "Miss Dunn," Wolfe said, "tell us exactly what you touched during this luncheon." Rachel swallowed. Her voice was tight. "My purse, my cup, my napkin, my plate, and the pledge cards," Arthur Klein said sharply. Rachel's eyes flashed. "Number, I never touched them." Celia Hart leaned forward. "Then why were you afraid to reach for tea?" Rachel's jaw tightened. "Because I did not want anyone to say I reached for anything." "That," Dr. Vale murmured, "is anxiety." Wolfe looked at him. "It is obedience." The word obedience made Rachel flinch, as if it had struck her. Wolfe's voice softened slightly, the way it does when he intends to be precise rather than brutal. "Fear does not always mean guilt, Miss Dunn. Sometimes it means you have been instructed." Rachel stared at him. Her eyes glistened, but she did not cry. "You do not know what they said." Wolfe nodded. "I know what you did. That is more useful." He turned his attention back to Molly Hale. "Miss Hale, you claim you only wanted Miss Dunn to look nice." Molly's mouth trembled. "Yes, then why lend gloves?" Wolfe asked, "instead of a scarf, or a brooch, or advice?" Molly's eyes darted to Paige Nolan. Paige's face had gone stiff, and her lips pressed together as if she were holding something back. Rachel spoke, very quietly. "Molly told me it would help." Wolfe's gaze flicked to Rachel. "Help what?" Rachel hesitated. Then, in a low voice that sounded like surrender, she said, "Help with first impressions." Wolfe nodded once. A phrase that can mean anything. It meant something specific here. Arthur Klein's voice rose. This is still ridiculous. It is gloves. It is lotion. It is a candle. You make it sound like a criminal conspiracy. Wolfe's tone was calm. A conspiracy is simply multiple people acting with a shared understanding. We have at least that. Paige Nolan's voice was strained. Mr. Wolfe, please. We are humiliating my staff. Wolfe looked at her. Madam, you have already humiliated yourself by allowing an arrangement in your house. I am now attempting to identify who constructed it. Then, as if the entire room were merely a set of props for his next question, Wolfe said, why was the candle lit in daylight at all? The question hung in the bright room. It was the simplest question, and therefore the most dangerous. A candle at night is normal. A candle at noon is a statement. If you cannot explain the statement, you are admitting the speaker is someone else. Molly answered too fast. Paige likes it, she said. Wolfe's eyes went cold. Paige Nolan's head snapped toward Molly. I never said that. Molly's face drained. She had spoken on reflex, not thought, and the reflex had betrayed her. Wolfe's voice remained mild, but it had a weight that made the room feel smaller. You are lying. Molly shook her head rapidly, panic rising. I mean. Yes, she does. Sometimes she likes the look of it. Not at noon, Paige Nolan said. Sharp with anger now, not in a room full of sun, never. Celia Hart murmured. Then why? Harris Bledsoe shifted. His voice was cautious. Mr. Wolfe, perhaps the simplest answer is that someone wanted attention fixed on the center of the table. Wolfe nodded slightly. Yes, but why? Dr. Vale said, to create tension, to make people nervous. Some people enjoy that. Wolfe looked at him. No one enjoys unnecessary tension, Doctor. They endure it, or they inflict it. Rachel Dunn's voice was a whisper. They said it had to be lit. Wolfe's gaze moved to her. Who? Rachel's lips tightened. She shook her head, and the motion was small, almost invisible. I do not know. Paige Nolan's voice dropped. Rachel, enough. You are making this worse. Rachel looked at Paige, and there was something in that look, anger and fear braided together. It was already worse. Wolfe watched them, his face unreadable. Then he said, Miss Hale, the candle is not an ornament, it is a warning. Molly's eyes widened. Number, yes, Wolfe said. It warns someone outside this room that the arrangement is proceeding, or it warns someone inside this room that it is time to act. Which is it? Molly shook her head, tears spilling now. I do not know. I only did what I was told. Wolfe's tone remained calm. By whom? Molly's gaze flicked to Paige Nolan again, then away, then back, like a trapped bird. Her mouth opened, and no sound came out. Paige Nolan's shoulders rose and fell in a sharp breath. Mr. Wolfe, she said, and the polished hostess voice was gone now, replaced by something raw. This is enough. You are turning my luncheon into a spectacle. Wolfe's eyes held hers. You turned it into a signal fire. I am merely observing the smoke. Arthur Klein's face had gone tight. We should call the police. Wolfe's head turned toward him. Not yet. Not yet, Bledsoe echoed, frowning. Why not? Wolfe's voice was flat. Because the police will blunder into this like men carrying buckets. They will spill everything. I require clarity first. Celia Hart said softly. And if the person you suspect acts again. Wolfe looked at the candle flame, steady and indifferent, then at Molly's bare hands with their faint sheen, then at Rachel's spotless borrowed gloves. He said, then they will act against a pattern I have now begun to see. Rachel's gloved fingers tightened around her cup, and I noticed, with a small chill, that she still did not lift it when anyone's hand moved near the flame. Obedience, Wolfe had called it. Wolfe turned to Paige Nolan. Madam, you will have Henry secure the doors. No one leaves until I have finished asking questions. That includes your lawyer. Harris Bledsoe's eyes widened. Now, see here. Wolfe looked at him. You may protest later. At present, you will be silent. Belso's mouth opened, then closed. It is remarkable how easily a large man can be silenced when the person speaking to him is larger in confidence. Wolfe faced the room again. The candle was lit in daylight for a reason. Miss Hale lied when she attempted to make it your preference. That means the reason belongs to someone else. We will now discover who. He paused, just long enough for everyone to feel the pause. Then he added, very calmly, and we will do so before the warning becomes a promise. The candle burned on steady in the bright room, not warming anyone, only marking time. Chapter 6. The lender's closet. If you ever want to see how quickly manners can turn into armor, put a flame on a table in broad daylight, and then say the word lying in a room full of people who think their names are protected by their tailor. The second candle Molly had lit was still burning, steady and bright, as if it had been hired for the job. It made a small yellow island in the sea of February sunlight, and nobody went near it. You could almost see the invisible fence around it. Wolfe had not ordered one, but the room had built it anyway. Paige Nolan stood with her hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles looked polished. Her face had that careful blankness wealthy people use when they are afraid and do not want anyone to profit from it. Molly Hale hovered near the wall, as if the wallpaper were a safer acquaintance than the guests. Rachel Dunn sat very straight, wearing gloves that were too good to be casual and too spotless to be honest. Arthur Klein was visibly offended by the entire concept of uncertainty. Harris Bledsoe was visibly offended by Nero Wolfe. Celia Hart looked like Christmas had come early. Dr. Vale looked like he was taking notes in his head. Wolfe, as usual, looked like a man who had been inconvenienced and intended to be repaid. He had asked Molly why a candle needed to be lit in daylight at all. She had answered too fast, and he had called her on it. That left the room in a state of suspended politeness, like a chandelier hanging by a thread. Wolfe's eyes moved slowly from the candle to the sideboard, and back to the candle again. He did not speak at once. He let the silence do what it does best, which is to make people fill it with their own mistakes. Rachel Dunn broke first, not with words, but with a tiny motion. Her left hand shifted, just a fraction, and the glove cuff rode up enough for the red pressure line to show again. Wolfe saw it. "Miss Dunn," Wolfe said, and his voice had that calm weight it carries when he has decided something. "You have done an excellent job of appearing guilty." Rachel's head snapped up. "I am not." "I agree," Wolfe said. "That is why you interest me. The guilty are often careless. You have been careful. That suggests instruction." Rachel's mouth tightened. "You keep saying that." "Because it is true," Wolfe replied. He turned his head toward Paige Nolan. "Madam, your house contains the answer. We will now find it." Paige blinked. "Find what?" Wolfe's gaze did not soften. "The pledge cards, for one, and whatever else has been arranged." Arthur Klein burst out. "This is ridiculous. We have been sitting here while you speculate. We should search the room." Wolfe looked at him. "Yes, we should, but we will do it intelligently." Klein's face reddened. "You imply we are not intelligent." Wolfe's tone was mild. "I imply nothing, I observe." Harris Bledsoe leaned forward. "Mr. Wolfe, you have no authority to detain us or to search private areas." Wolfe looked at him unhurried. "Mr. Bledsoe, I am not searching your person. I am searching my problem. If you wish to leave, you may attempt it. Henry will prevent you. If Henry fails, I will instruct Archie to assist. If you persist, you may then consult your authority in the street." Bledsoe stared at him. He had the look of a man deciding whether he could legally punch someone who was sitting down. Wolfe was standing. That helped. Paige Nolan said sharply, "Henry will do no such thing." Wolfe's eyes moved to her. "Madam, your luncheon is already a spectacle. You may decide whether it will be a controlled one." Paige's jaw trembled. For a moment she looked at the candle flame as if it might offer guidance. Then she swallowed and said, very quietly, "What do you want?" Wolfe nodded once, as if accepting her surrender. "A tablecloth." That threw them, all of them. Even Celia Hart blinked. "A tablecloth," Paige repeated. "Yes," Wolfe said. "From your linen closet, preferably one that has not been used recently." Paige's brows drew together. Why? Wolfe's voice remained calm. Because a person who removes paper may wrap it. A person who hides something quickly uses what is near. Cloth is near in a house that entertains. Arthur Klein scoffed. Or you simply wish to invent a reason to send Mr. Goodwin upstairs. Wolfe looked at him. That is also possible. Klein's mouth opened, then closed. Wolfe turned slightly to me. Archie, go with Miss Nolan's permission. Bring a tablecloth from the linen closet. While you do so, observe. That last word was for me. Wolfe does not send you to fetch cloth for your health. He sends you because he wants a man with eyes in a place where people think only hands matter. I looked at Paige Nolan. Permission. Paige hesitated, then nodded sharply. Fine. The linen closet is on the second floor, in the hall near the study. I will have Henry guide you. Wolfe shook his head slightly. No guide. Archie knows how to walk. That was Wolfe, protecting his errand from helpful witnesses. I headed for the stairs, and Paige called after me, do not go into private rooms. I looked back. In this house, lady, everything is private. Her face tightened, but she said nothing. She could not. Wolfe's presence had made her own indignation feel decorative. The staircase was carpeted, and the hall upstairs was quiet in the way expensive. Houses are quiet as if sound has been trained to behave. The air smelled faintly of Polish, and something floral that did not come from flowers. A perfume that had settled into fabric, the kind that suggests regular parties and regular secrecy. The linen closet was easy to find. It had a plain door, which is always suspicious in a house full of ornate ones. I opened it and found shelves of folded cloth, stacked with the kind of precision Wolfe would admire. Tablecloths, napkins, runners, placemats, white, cream, patterned, a small fortune in laundry. I reached for a folded cloth on the middle shelf, then paused. To my right, on the floor of the closet, there was a cardboard box. It was not hidden, it was not locked, it was simply there, as if it belonged in the category of things nobody ever asks about. The label on the lid read, Winter Accessories. That made me smile, because New York winter accessories usually mean gloves, scarves, hats, and the mild despair of waiting for a cab. The lid was not fully closed. It sat askew, as if someone had looked inside and then failed to put it back properly. That is not normal in a house where even the linens are arranged like a military parade. I am a polite man when it suits me, but I work for Nero Wolfe. My politeness has learned to step aside. Gloves, several pairs, some neatly wrapped in tissue, some folded and worn, leather, knit, suede, black, brown, grey, some new enough to still look stiff, some old enough to have softened at the fingers, and one pair was missing its mate. It was pale. Cream, colored leather with a simple stitch line near the wrist and a lining that looked like thin silk. The right glove was there, the left glove was not. My eyes went automatically to my own hand, as if my fingers could confirm what my brain already knew. Rachel Dunn was wearing a pale glove that was slightly too large. I did not have to be a fashion expert to recognize the stitching. It was the same. The cuff seam had the same small diagonal detail. The lining visible at the edge was the same faint sheen. The missing mate was exactly the glove Rachel was wearing. That was satisfying, in the way a puzzle piece is satisfying when it clicks. But it also made my stomach tighten, because it meant Rachel's story about borrowing the gloves was true. It also meant the gloves were not simply Molly Hale's personal pair. They were stored with other gloves. In Paige Nolan's linen closet, that suggested something else. Assistants do not keep their winter accessories in their employer's linen closet, not unless they have been instructed to. Not unless the gloves belong to the house, not the girl. I set the lid back, almost, not fully. I wanted it to look as it had looked when I found it. Partly open and careless. A closet does not complain, but people do. I reached for the tablecloth again, and then noticed something under the glove box, pressed flat against the closet floor. A flat envelope. It was the kind used for documents, heavy paper with a flap. It was tucked under the box, not sealed, as if it had been pushed there in a hurry and then weighted down. I slid the box aside a few inches, lifted the envelope, and felt its contents. Paper, several pieces, thick cards by the feel of them. The pledge cards, my pulse bumped once, not because it was a shock, but because it was a relief. When you find the thing everyone is fighting about, the room changes even before you bring it back. I opened the envelope just enough to see inside. The pledge cards were there, still bound with a ribbon, untorn, unread, simply removed, as if the act was more important than the contents. The ribbon was neat, not hurried. Someone had taken the time to keep them orderly. That was also important. A thief in a panic crumples paper. A thief following instructions preserves it. I closed the envelope, put the glove box back where it had been, and selected a tablecloth from the shelf, because Wolfe had asked for one, and he likes obedience when it comes from me. Then I stood for a second in the quiet hall, holding cloth and envelope, and let the picture sharpen. The pledge cards had been on the sideboard, they had been removed without being used. They had been hidden upstairs in a linen closet, under a box labeled winter accessories, partly open, as if someone had used it and then failed to finish tidying. That someone had access to the upstairs hall during the luncheon, or just before it. It could be Molly, it could be Henry, it could be Paige, it could even be a guest if the house had been arranged to allow it. But the gloves pointed to a more specific hand. The missing mate matched Rachel's glove. Rachel had been made to wear it, or had accepted it, to play her role. The glove box, being in the linen closet, suggested this was not a casual borrowing between two young women. It was a supply, stored in the house, ready for use. A house glove, a stage prop, a candle, a clock, a glove, and now a closet. Wolfe was right. The house contained the answer. The trick was to see which answer it wanted to confess. I went downstairs, and the dining room greeted me with a silence so neat it could have been pressed. Everyone turned their eyes to me at once, and that is a wonderful thing. It means you have something they want. Wolfe stood near the table, facing the group like a judge who has already decided, but is willing to listen out of politeness. Paige Nolan's gaze locked on the tablecloth in my arm, then slid to the envelope in my hand. Her face changed. The color drained out of it, as if someone had opened a valve. Molly Hale went still, not stiff, not tense, but still in a deeper way, like a person caught mid-step on a stair. Rachel Dunn's eyes widened, and her gloved hands tightened around the edge of the chair. Arthur Klein leaned forward slightly, his expression hungry and furious at once. Harris Bledsoe's jaw set, Celia Hart's lips parted, delighted. Dr. Vale watched everyone's faces with clinical pleasure. I crossed to Wolfe and set the tablecloth on a chair without fuss. Then I held out the envelope. "Found it," I said. Wolfe did not reach for it at once. He looked at my face, reading what I was not saying. Then he took the envelope, opened it carefully, and slid out the bound pledge cards, just enough to confirm. He did not read them. He did not untie the ribbon. He simply looked at them, then back at the room. "The pledge cards," Wolfe said quietly. The room went quieter, which in a quiet room is an achievement. Paige Nolan's hand went to her throat, as if checking whether she still had a voice. Molly Hale's eyes fixed on the envelope, unblinking. Rachel Dunn's breath came shallow, but she did not move. Arthur Klein's voice, when it came, was tight. "Where were they?" "In the linen closet," I said. "In the hall upstairs." Paige's head jerked. "That is impossible." "Nothing is impossible in a house with stairs," I said. Wolfe looked at Paige Nolan, and his voice softened in the way it does when he is about to be cruel with precision. "Madam," Wolfe said, "who uses that closet?" Paige swallowed. "The staff. I do not, usually." "Which staff?" Wolfe asked. "Henry," Paige said. "The maid, Molly. Anyone who sets the table." Wolfe nodded once. "So the cards were removed from the sideboard and placed upstairs in a linen closet used by those who serve. That narrows the field." Arthur Klein's eyes snapped to Molly. "You, Molly flinched. Number Rachel's head turned sharply toward Molly too, and I could see that whatever loyalty existed between them had just been punched in the stomach. Wolfe lifted a hand. "No accusations yet. I prefer evidence," I said. "There is more." Wolfe's eyes flicked to me. "Yes, the glove box," I said. "In the closet, labeled winter accessories, several pairs, one pair missing its mate." Rachel Dunn made a small sound, like a breath swallowed wrong. Wolfe's gaze moved to her hands. "The mate is on Miss Dunn's hand." Paige's eyes widened. "What?" "It is the same glove," Wolfe said, calm. "The stitching, the lining, Archie has confirmed it." Rachel's voice came out thin. "I told you I borrowed them." Wolfe nodded. "Yes, but you did not borrow them from Miss Hale's personal drawer. You borrowed them from the house." Molly's face went white. "They are not mine," she whispered. Paige Nolan's mouth opened, then closed. Her eyes darted to the candle and back, as if the flame could explain itself. Arthur Klein said, harshly, "Then whose are they?" Wolfe did not answer him. He looked instead at Paige Nolan, and in that look, I saw something shift. Wolfe was aligning the new information with the pattern he had been assembling since the candle first burned too low. Then Wolfe said softly, "The closet is the only witness that does not get nervous." That line landed the way Wolfe's lines land, quiet and final. A closet cannot lie. It cannot blush. It cannot rehearse. It simply holds what it is given. Paige Nolan's lips trembled. "I do not understand." Wolfe's voice remained gentle, which was more dangerous than his bluntness. "You understand. You are merely deciding whether to admit it." Molly Hale's hands, bare and faintly shiny at the fingertips, curled into fists. "I did not take them," she said, and it sounded like desperation. Wolfe looked at her. "Perhaps not, but you know who placed them there." Molly's eyes darted to Paige Nolan again. Rachel Dunn's gloved hands rose, then fell back to her lap. "Please," she whispered, and I did not know who she was pleading with. Wolfe, Paige, Molly, or the candle. Wolfe set the envelope with the cards on the table beside the candle holder, as if placing evidence next to its signal. "Now," Wolfe said, "we have retrieved what was removed. The act is undone. That does not undo the intention." He looked around the room, taking in each face, each reaction, each small betrayal of composure. "Summoning wanted those pledge cards absent during the luncheon," Wolfe said. "Not destroyed, not stolen for profit, removed. That is a message, a warning. The candle is another warning. They are coordinated." Paige Nolan's face had gone so pale, it looked almost luminous in the sunlight. "A warning to whom?" Wolfe's eyes held hers. "To you, madam, and perhaps to Miss Dunn as well." Rachel flinched. Wolfe's voice stayed steady. "Someone in this house arranged a signal that could be seen. Someone arranged props, gloves, and candle. Someone arranged the temporary disappearance of paper that contains names. Those are not random mischiefs. They are communication." Arthur Klein's voice shook with anger. "Then who?" Wolfe did not answer. "Not yet." Wolfe rarely spends his best conclusion in the middle of the room. He looked at the candle flame, steady in the bright room, and then at the bound pledge cards. He glanced at Molly's slick fingertips. He glanced at Rachel's spotless gloves, one of which now belonged to the closet upstairs. Then Wolfe said, very calmly, "We will now identify who needed the warning and who delivered it." Outside the tall windows, New York moved on, noisy and indifferent, like a city that assumes other people's disasters are entertainment. Inside, in Paige Nolan's bright dining room, a closet had spoken without words, and everyone had heard it. Chapter 7. Who needed the cards? If you want to learn what a person values, take something away from them in a room full of witnesses and watch which part of their face moves first. Some people show it in the mouth, some in the eyes. Paige Nolan showed it in her posture. The envelope with the pledge cards lay on the table beside the candle holder, like a polite insult wrapped in ribbon. Wolfe had not untied it. He did not need to. The fact of its presence was enough. Paige Nolan stood very straight, chin lifted, shoulders set, offended as if someone had accused her of borrowing a neighbor's teaspoon. She looked at Wolfe with a controlled fury that made her late smile vanish altogether. "I did not steal anything from my own event," she said. "This is grotesque." Wolfe's tone was mild. "No one has said you did." Arthur Klein's head jerked. "Then who did?" Wolfe glanced at him, and the glance had the weight of a paperweight. "Patience, Mr. Klein. You will not expire from it." Klein's face reddened, but he held his tongue. "That is the trouble with being efficient. You assume the world should also be efficient, and the world laughs at you." Paige Nolan's eyes flicked to the bound pledge cards. "Those were on my sideboard," she said. "They vanished during lunch. Now you tell me they were upstairs in my linen closet. If you expect me to accept that as some clever parlor trick, you are mistaken." Wolfe nodded slightly. "You are offended. Good. Offense can be genuine. It can also be convenient." Paige's breath caught. "Convenient." "Yes," Wolfe said. "It diverts attention from the question that matters." Celia Hart leaned forward, her voice quiet with relish. "And what question is that?" Wolfe's eyes moved to her, and for a moment they softened, because Celia Hart's curiosity was honest, which is rarer than money in that room. "Who needed the cards absent?" Wolfe said. "Not stolen, not destroyed, absent." Harris Bledsoe's jaw worked. "Why would anyone need them absent? They are pledge cards, not bearer bonds." Wolfe looked at him. "Mr. Bledsoe, you are a lawyer. You should understand the value of a signature." Bledsoe made a small, irritated sound. Wolfe continued. "The cards are a record of commitments. They are evidence of promises. They are also, as Miss Nolan said, names that cannot be replaced. A name on a pledge card is a lever. Someone wanted that lever, or wanted to prevent another person from using it." Rachel Dunn sat with her gloved hands in her lap. She looked like a woman holding her breath in stages, letting out only what she could afford to. Her eyes moved from Wolfe to Paige Nolan and back again, and then, very briefly, to Molly Hale by the wall. Molly Hale was still too still. People do not stand like that unless they are bracing for impact. Paige Nolan said sharply, "This is ridiculous. No one needed anything. My assistant must have misfiled them. Or your Mr. Goodwin is mistaken." I spoke before Wolfe could, because I was not going to let Paige Nolan rewrite my eyesight in her own dining room. "I'm not mistaken," I said. "They were in an envelope under a box labeled winter accessories, and while I was there, I noticed one glove missing its mate." Rachel's shoulders tightened, Paige's eyes narrowed. "You were in my closet long enough to inventory glove pairs." "I work for Wolfe," I said. "We are trained to be annoying." Wolfe gave me a brief glance that meant, "Do not be too proud of that." Then he looked at Molly Hale. "Miss Hale, you have heard this. You have seen the pledge cards recovered. Do you wish to continue being still, or do you wish to speak?" Molly's throat moved. She swallowed hard, and for the first time her gaze left Paige Nolan. "I hid them," she said. The room reacted like a chain of small explosions. Arthur Klein made a sharp sound and stepped forward. Paige Nolan's eyes widened, and then her face went tight, as if she were trying to clamp her own expression back into place. Harris Bledsoe stared at Molly like a man, discovering a leak in his client's boat. Celia Hart's lips parted in delight. Dr. Vale's eyes brightened, because he loves a confession the way some men love applause. Rachel Dunn's head lowered slightly, and she closed her eyes for a moment, as if something painful had just been confirmed. Paige Nolan's voice, when it came, was cold. "You hid them." Molly's voice shook. "Yes, Miss Nolan." "Without telling me," Paige snapped. Molly flinched. "Yes." Arthur Klein's face was rigid with anger. "Do you understand what you have done? Those cards are records. They are commitments. They are legal, if necessary." "I know," Wolfe spoke, not loud, but heavy enough to settle the room again. "Miss Hale has admitted the act. We are now concerned with motive." Paige Nolan turned on Wolfe. "Motive? She is my employee. If she stole my cards, her motive is simple. She is dishonest." Wolfe shook his head slowly. Number if she were dishonest. She would have removed the cards from the house. She would not have placed them upstairs under a box that practically wears a sign saying, "Look here." She concealed them. She did not steal them. Wolfe's gaze stayed on Molly. Tell us. Molly's hands twisted together, bare fingers sliding against each other, with that faint sheen Wolfe had noticed. To protect Miss Nolan. Paige's head jerked. Protect me? Yes, Molly whispered. Arthur Klein barked a short laugh that held no amusement. Protect her by sabotaging her luncheon. Molly flinched. It was not sabotage, it was to stop something. Wolfe's voice was calm. Stop what? Molly hesitated. Her eyes flicked, just for a second, to Rachel Dunn. Wolfe's gaze sharpened. Miss Hale, protect her from what? And do not insult me with vagueness. Molly swallowed. From embarrassment. From a scene, from trouble. Paige Nolan's face reddened. You decided that for me. Molly's eyes filled. You do not understand. Paige's voice rose. No, Molly. You do not understand. You do not decide what is embarrassing to me. You do not decide what is trouble. You do not decide anything. Wolfe lifted a hand, and Paige's anger stopped short. Not because she respected Wolfe, but because she could not bear his attention on her while she flailed. Wolfe looked at Molly again. Rachel Dunn is involved. You glanced at her. That was not accidental. Explain. Rachel's shoulders tightened, and she drew a slow breath that sounded like it hurt. Molly's voice dropped. I did not want Rachel to do it. Paige stared. Do what? Rachel opened her eyes. Her voice, when it came, was low and controlled. Confront you. Paige's face went blank for a second, then hardened. Confront me about what? Rachel's gloved hands rose slowly from her lap and rested on the table. They looked absurdly clean. Her eyes stayed on Paige Nolan. I overheard you, Rachel said. Paige's nostrils flared. Overheard me. Yes, Rachel said. 2 days ago in your office you were on the phone. Arthur Klein stiffened. Rachel ignored him. She kept her gaze on Paige. You were talking about the raffle, about the sponsor. Paige's lips tightened. What sponsor? Rachel's voice stayed steady, but the words came out like a careful inventory. The new sponsor you have been cultivating. The one who wants to be generous, but wants a favor in return. You said you would quietly change the winner list to favor them. The room snapped into a different kind of silence. It was no longer the silence of missing pledge cards. It was the silence of reputations being measured for weight. Celia Hart's eyes widened, delighted and shocked at once. Harris Bledsoe went rigid. Arthur Klein's face went pale, and then his jaw clenched so hard I thought his teeth might crack. Dr. Vale's expression turned thoughtful, as if a diagnosis had just become more complicated. Paige Nolan's face flushed, then drained. She looked at Rachel as if Rachel had walked into her dining room carrying a live grenade. That is nonsense, Paige said, too quickly. Rachel's chin lifted. Is it? Paige's voice sharpened. You are a staff member. You misheard, or you assumed, or you are bitter. Rachel's mouth twisted. I did not mishear. You said you could not afford to lose him. You said the foundation needs him. You said the raffle is a small thing compared to what he might give. Paige's hands clenched at her sides. That is not what I meant. Rachel's eyes flashed. It was what you said. Wolfe watched Paige Nolan with calm attention. He did not interrupt. He knew better. A person telling the truth, or trying to, needs room, Rachel continued. I came to the luncheon intending to speak to you privately, not to make a scene, not at the table privately. I wanted you to stop. Paige's voice was tight. Stop what? A conversation you think you heard. Rachel's gloved fingers curled. Stop treating the foundation like your personal machine. That landed. Paige flinched, and it was the first genuine movement she had shown in minutes. Arthur Klein snapped. This is outrageous. Wolfe turned his head slightly toward Klein. Mr. Klein, be silent. Your indignation is not evidence. Klein's face went crimson, but he held his tongue. Wolfe looked at Molly Hale. "So you learned that Miss Dunn intended to confront your employer?" Molly nodded, tears slipping now. "Yes." "How?" Wolfe asked. Molly's voice was small. "Rachel told me this morning. She was upset. She said she could not stand it." Rachel's eyes narrowed. "I told you because you asked why I was nervous." Molly nodded again. "I asked because I could see you shaking." Rachel's mouth tightened, but she did not deny it. Wolfe's tone stayed calm. "And you feared a scene?" Molly nodded. "Yes, if Rachel confronted Miss Nolan at the wrong moment, with the wrong people listening, it would be awful." Paige Nolan's voice came sharp. "Molly, you are not my guardian." Molly flinched, then spoke with sudden desperation. "I was trying to save you." Wolfe's gaze remained steady. "Save her from public embarrassment, and save yourself from losing your position." Molly's eyes widened. Number Wolfe did not soften. "Yes, protecting Paige Nolan is also protecting Molly Hale. That is understandable. It is not admirable, but it is understandable." Molly's shoulders sagged. "I did not want the fundraiser ruined." Wolfe nodded. "So you removed the pledge cards?" Molly swallowed. "Yes." Arthur Klein's voice burst out again. "How does removing pledge cards prevent a confrontation?" Wolfe looked at him, and the answer was in his eyes before he spoke. "Because it changes the terrain. Without the pledge cards, the raffle cannot proceed as designed. The luncheon becomes unsettled, the hostess becomes distracted, and most importantly, a staff member has a lever." Celia Hart murmured. "Leverage," Wolfe nodded. Miss Hale intended to control the sequence. She could return the cards when she chose. She could delay, she could insist on privacy. She could, if necessary, threaten to explain the disappearance in a way that would implicate Miss Dunn, who was already nervous and wearing borrowed gloves. Rachel's face tightened. "You did that." Molly's chin trembled. "I did not want to." Rachel's eyes were hard now. "You did it." Molly's voice broke. "I thought if you were nervous enough you would stay quiet until I could get you alone. I thought I could talk you down." Wolfe's gaze sharpened, and the candle. Molly swallowed. Her eyes flicked to the candle flame, then away. It was a warning. Paige Nolan's head snapped. A warning to whom? Molly's voice was low. "To Rachel." Rachel's mouth opened slightly. "To me." Molly nodded. If it burned low, it meant time was running out. It meant you had to stay careful. It meant you could not make a move. Not at the table. Wolfe spoke softly, and the softness made the words feel heavier. "A candle is a clock if you know who set it. You set it, Miss Hale. You lit it early so it would reach a visible point during the luncheon." Molly's shoulders sagged. "Yes." Rachel's gloved hands clenched on the tablecloth. "You used it to keep me obedient." Molly shook her head, sobbing quietly. "I did not mean it like that." Wolfe's tone was mild and final. "You meant it exactly like that. You wrapped control in courtesy." Paige Nolan's face was pale now, her offense cracking into something closer to fear. "This is insane. You are telling me my assistant staged a candle and hid pledge cards because a staff member might confront me?" Wolfe's gaze held hers. "Madam, it is not insane. It is petty and clever. It is also dangerous, because petty control often invites larger control." Arthur Klein's eyes were fixed on Paige. "Is it true? The sponsor, the raffle list?" Paige's jaw tightened. "Arthur, do not do this here." Klein's voice went harsh. "Is it true?" Paige's eyes flashed. "The foundation needs money." "That is not an answer," Klein said. Wolfe spoke, calm as stone. "Whether it is true is not my primary concern at this moment, though it will become one. My concern is that Miss Hale chose to manage the situation by removing evidence and introducing a signal. She used Miss Dunn's borrowed gloves as part of the management." Rachel's voice was tight. "Explain that." Wolfe looked at her. The gloves were not for you to avoid fingerprints. You said, "You never touched the pledge cards, I believe you." Rachel stared. "You do," Wolfe nodded. "Yes. Fear does not always mean guilt. Sometimes it means obedience. You were afraid to gesture near the candle because you were made to feel watched. The gloves made you self-conscious. They made you careful. They made you a visible source of tension. They also ensured that if you were accused of taking something, no prints would be found on anything you touched." Rachel's face tightened, and for the first time her eyes shone with anger more than fear. "So I was a shield." Wolfe's voice remained calm. "A shield and a distraction." Molly sobbed softly. "I did not want to hurt you." Rachel's voice cut. "You wanted to control me." Molly's shoulders shook. She did not deny it. Wolfe looked around the room, taking in each person's reaction, each private calculation. Then he said, quietly, "This is not theft. It is control." Celia Hart murmured, wrapped in courtesy. Wolfe inclined his head, precisely. Paige Nolan's hands trembled, then stilled. "And you think that is all?" Wolfe's gaze met hers. "It is what has been admitted. It is not necessarily all that is present." The candle burned steady, bright in a bright room, still doing its small job of making people watch their hands. The pledge cards lay bound and untouched, as if they had never mattered, except as a lever. And the air in Paige Nolan's dining room had shifted into a new state, where politeness was no longer a habit but a weapon, held carefully so it would not slip. Wolfe's eyes moved from Paige to Molly to Rachel, and then he said, very softly, "Now we will address what Miss Dunn overheard and what Miss Nolan intended, because control requires a reason, and reasons have a habit of leaving bodies even when no one has planned for them." That last sentence landed like a door closing. I looked at the candle and thought, not for the first time, that it was a foolish thing to burn at noon, unless it was there to warn you that the bright room was not safe. Chapter 8. Extinguishing the arrangement. When Nero Wolfe decides a matter has reached its natural end, he does not hurry it. He allows the truth to settle into the room like dust after furniture has been moved. In Paige Nolan's dining room, the truth had finally found places to sit, and no one liked the view. The candle still burned, steady and upright, throwing a small, stubborn flame into a room already full of light. The pledge cards lay bound with their ribbon beside it, as neat and untouched as a moral intention that has survived. Temptation. Wolfe stood at the head of the table, large and immovable, his presence imposing order simply by existing. He picked up the envelope, opened it, and slid the cards back inside with care. Then he held them out to Paige Nolan. She took them, but not gratefully. Her fingers closed around the envelope as if it were heavier than paper. "You have your cards," Wolfe said. "You do not have your innocence." Paige's chin lifted. "I never asked for absolution." "No," Wolfe agreed. "You asked for control. You nearly lost it." Arthur Klein shifted forward. "What happens now?" Wolfe turned his head slightly, acknowledging him without granting him authority. "Now the raffle proceeds, or it does not. But if it proceeds, it will do so transparently." Paige stiffened. "You are not in charge of my foundation." "No," Wolfe said. "But I am in charge of my silence." That landed. Paige's eyes narrowed, calculating. Wolfe continued, his voice steady and unhurried. "You will announce an independent count of the raffle pledges immediately. You will permit a neutral party to verify the cards and the outcome. You will do it now, while the luncheon guests are present, or you will cancel the raffle entirely." Paige's mouth tightened. "This is coercion. This is prevention," Wolfe replied. "There is a difference." Harris Bledsoe leaned forward. "Mr. Wolfe, you cannot threaten my client." Wolfe looked at him. "I am not threatening. I am describing consequences. If this arrangement is exposed later, it will appear deliberate. If it is corrected now, it will appear prudent." Paige's fingers tightened on the envelope. "And if I refuse?" Wolfe's eyes held hers. "Then this story leaves this room without me. It will improve itself with repetition. Celia Hart inhaled softly, delighted and appalled. Arthur Klein stared at Paige as if seeing her for the first time. Paige Nolan looked down at the envelope, then up again. The composure she had worn all afternoon finally cracked, just enough to show the strain underneath. The raffle will be run clean immediately, or it will not be run at all. Wolfe inclined his head. Wise. Paige's voice hardened. Do not congratulate yourself. You have humiliated me. Wolfe's tone remained calm. Madam, you humiliated yourself when you permitted arrangements to replace judgment. Molly Hale stood by the wall, hands clenched, her earlier stillness replaced by something brittle. She had been shrinking steadily as the room clarified, and now there was nowhere left for her to stand. Wolfe turned his attention to her. Miss Hale, he said, you engineered the candle and the gloves. Molly swallowed. Yes. You hid the pledge cards. Yes. You did so to control the behavior of another person. Molly's voice broke. I was trying to keep things from exploding. Wolfe regarded her steadily. You replaced one explosion with several smaller ones. That is not prevention. That is cowardice with planning. Rachel Dunn's hands were still gloved, but they trembled now, no longer disciplined by fear. Her eyes were fixed on Molly, and the anger there was no longer restrained. You made me feel watched, Rachel said. You made me feel like I could not move without permission. Molly's shoulders shook. I did not want to hurt you. You wanted me quiet, Rachel said. You wanted me obedient. Wolfe spoke, and his voice cut cleanly through the exchange. Miss Hale, you will apologize. Molly looked up, startled. Apologize? Yes, Wolfe said, to Miss Dunn directly, without explanation. Molly turned to Rachel. Her face was wet now, the careful efficiency gone completely. I am sorry, she said. I used you. I made you afraid. I had no right. Rachel held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded once. Number you did not. Wolfe continued. You will also resign from handling donations, pledges, or records of any kind immediately. Paige Nolan stiffened. I did not agree to that. Wolfe turned to her. You will. Paige's eyes flashed. You cannot dictate my staffing. Wolfe's voice stayed calm. You can dictate it, or I will. Arthur Klein inhaled sharply. Paige. She looked at him, then back at Wolfe. The calculation was visible now, stripped of charm. Molly, Paige said coldly. You are relieved of those duties. Molly nodded, defeated. Yes, Miss Nolan. Wolfe's gaze returned to Rachel Dunn. Miss Dunn, he said, you may remove the gloves. Rachel hesitated, then slowly peeled them from her hands. The movement was deliberate, almost ceremonial. When the gloves came off, she let them fall to the table, and her hands rested there bare, pale and steady. The relief on her face was immediate and unmistakable, as if she had shed a weight she had not known how to name. I did not want any of this, Rachel said quietly. I know, Wolfe replied. You wanted the truth spoken privately. You were denied that. Wolfe turned to Paige Nolan again. You will decide now. The fundraiser will be clean, or it will be cancelled. There will be no quiet adjustments, no favors disguised as necessity. Paige's shoulders sagged slightly. If I cancel, it will raise questions. If you proceed dishonestly, it will raise more, Wolfe said. Paige closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, the calculation had ended. It will be clean, she said, or it will not happen. Wolfe inclined his head again. Then this matter is concluded. I had been standing near the table, watching the flame, feeling an itch I had been holding back since the beginning. Wolfe glanced at me. Archie, he said, that was permission. I stepped forward, lifted the snuffer, and brought it down over the candle. The flame vanished instantly, without protest. A thin curl of smoke rose and dissipated into the daylight. The room felt brighter. Not because the sun had changed, but because the signal had ended. Hands relaxed, shoulders lowered. The invisible fence around the center of the table dissolved. Rachel looked at her bare hands and flexed her fingers, as if confirming they were still hers. Paige Nolan exhaled, long and controlled. Arthur Klein straightened, already recalculating. Celia Hart looked faintly disappointed that the drama had concluded. Dr. Vale looked thoughtful, perhaps considering a lecture on control and compliance. Wolfe turned away from the table. "Madam," he said to Paige, "my fee will be delivered tomorrow." Paige nodded stiffly. "Of course," Wolfe added, "if you find yourself tempted to substitute arrangement for integrity again, remember this candle." It did not warm anyone. It only revealed who was nervous. Paige said nothing. Wolfe turned to Rachel Dunn. "You may leave." Rachel hesitated, then gathered the borrowed gloves and held them out to Molly. Molly did not take them at once. Rachel placed them on the table instead, beside the extinguished candle holder. "They are not mine," Rachel said. "They never were." She left without another word. Wolfe watched her go, then turned to me. "Archie," he said, "we are done." We collected our coats and stepped back into the February afternoon. The city was unchanged, sharp and loud and indifferent, but I felt lighter, the way you do when a room has been set right. As we rode back to West 35th Street, Wolfe was silent, which meant he was satisfied. At the brownstone, Fritz met us with a look that asked no questions. Wolfe went upstairs at once, drawn back to his orchids and his chair, to order restored and problems concluded. I lingered a moment in the front room, thinking about a candle at noon and how easily courtesy becomes a tool. Then I went upstairs too, because if there is one thing I have learned, it is that when Nero Wolfe snuffs a flame, he expects the smoke to stay gone.